Chapter 15. When Wuxia got closer, she realized that her older brother was also in the room. He was holding Wuxia with one hand and had a gentle expression on his face that she had never seen before. She was clearly a bastard child, but she was able to secure her position as the legitimate daughter of the Marquis household. Moreover, the old ancestor and her older brother seemed to dote on her even more. Wuxia looked on coldly. She really couldn't understand what kind of witchcraft Wuxia had used on the two of them. Although she couldn't figure it out, without Wuxia's financial support and the loathing of her mother and grandmother, her recent days had been really difficult. The servants in the courtyard had all been changed, and she was no longer able to use them. The Lin clan had even specially sent over a fierce-looking old woman. Wherever she went, the old woman would follow and keep a close eye on her. Her every word and action was under someone else's control. This kind of oppressive feeling could drive her crazy. But what made Wuxia feel even more hopeless was that the old ancestor hadn't taken her out to socialize for more than 2 months. She was now 12 years old and should be taken out more often to let the womenfolk see her. Only then would there be hope for a good marriage in the future. If the old ancestor didn't act as a matchmaker for her, she was just a concubine's daughter. Which noble family would want to marry her? The most likely outcome was that she would be casually married off as soon as she reached the age. A 6th-rank manager and a 7th-rank registrar was already the limit. In the future, she wouldn't be able to live a life of unparalleled wealth like the Marquis household. The more she thought about it, the more unwilling she felt. She could only thicken her face and try to curry favor with Wuxia again. Before she even got close, she heard her annoying laughter that sounded like a little hen's. She couldn't help but speak up for the girl. She felt that she wasn't in the wrong, but she was frightened by Yupinyan's cold glare. So what if her leg was broken? Big Brother and the old ancestor were about to spoil Wuxia to the heavens. When the real Wuxia comes back, be careful not to fall to her death. Wuxia thought to herself viciously, but she still had a gentle smile on her face. After greeting Yupinyan, she looked at Wuxia and said in an aggrieved tone, "As long as little sister is happy, it's fine. Big sister spoke too much." Yupinyan looked on coldly from the side. She had a lot of things to say, but it was not appropriate for her to say them now. She could only stand outside the window awkwardly. Wuxia supported his chin with one hand and leaned against the window. He didn't take the initiative to ask her why she was here, nor did he invite her into the house. He just let her stand under the hot sun. The smile on his face was 3 parts lazy and 7 parts evil. Cui Ping and Cui she had already shrunk to the bottom of the wall. Wuxia took several deep breaths before she could calm herself down. She slowly said, "Today is the Thousand Autumns Festival. Her Majesty the Empress ordered people to make 999 palace lanterns and hang them in Shiha Garden for people to admire. Big Brother just came back from a banquet in the palace. Did you see them?" The so-called "for people to admire" was only limited to the most prestigious families. Marquis Yongle naturally had the qualifications, but she was afraid that Wuxia couldn't go. The old ancestor also wouldn't take her. You can only admire the lanterns at night. Yupinyan rubbed the little girl in his arms and asked, "Will Xiang go?" "I'm not going." Wuxia refused without hesitation. How could a few palace lanterns be more beautiful than neon lights? She also felt annoyed when there were more people. "No, you have to go. Big Brother will come pick you up at 7 in the morning." Yupinyan made the final decision. He wouldn't allow Xiang to hide in this small courtyard for the rest of her life, living a lonely and lowly life. He hoped that she could live happily, ostentatiously, and freely. Wuxia's mouth flattened. She was about to protest, but she saw Yupinyan get off the bed, put on his shoes, and leave without giving her a chance to speak. Wuxia hurriedly chased after him and begged, "Big Brother, can you take me with you? Xiang's legs aren't well, so I can take care of her if I go with her." Yu Pinyin nodded slightly and quickened his pace. Yu Xiu felt that there was no need to curry favor with Yu Xiang anymore. She stood at the door and smiled at her, then hurriedly left with the old woman. She had to hurry back and prepare her clothes for the evening. The Lantern Festival was set in Shihe Garden. The Empress had chosen the Crown Princess to host it, and all the womenfolk had come to support it. If she could gain the favor of some noble or make friends with a few noble daughters, it would be very beneficial for her future. Seeing that the eldest miss and little Master Ho had left, Cui Pingsui happily threw away the net and left without saying anything. Her eyes were full of resentment. Tao Hong pointed at the two's backs and said indignantly, "Miss, they were so rude to you behind Master Ho's back. Why didn't you tell Master Ho? There's no hurry. When I'm tired of playing, I'll naturally deal with them." Yu Xiang waved her hand. When she thought about going to the Lantern Festival in such a hot and stuffy evening, she immediately became dispirited. Although the great Han dynasty wasn't the Han dynasty that Yu Xiang knew of, the social customs were very similar, and there were fewer restrictions on women. Unmarried girls could participate in large gatherings as long as they were accompanied by servants. There were restrictions between men and women, but it wasn't serious. It wasn't difficult for women to remarry, and some noble daughters with high status could even remarry until they found a good man. At the end of the 7 in the morning, Shihe Garden was packed with people of all ages. All the nobles gathered in the Yu Water Pavilion for a banquet. During the banquet, they chatted heartily and had no interest in admiring the lanterns. The noblewomen gathered in the main hall to pay their respects to the Empress and the Crown Princess while chatting about daily life. Most of the unmarried men, women, and children ran to the back garden where the lanterns were placed. It was the brightest and most lively place. Yu Pinyin pushed Yu Xiang to the back garden's entrance and gently said, "Big brother has something to discuss with His Highness the Crown Prince. Be good and stay here. Big brother will come find you when he's done. Do you see, there are many beautiful lanterns over there? If you want to see them, you can call Tao Hong and Lu Lu to push you over there." After saying this, he gave his sister an encouraging look and then strode away. Encouraging your sister? It's true, do you think that I, Yu Xiang, am unwilling to come because I have low self-esteem, so you want to provoke me to take the initiative to interact with the crowd? My stupid big brother, you're looking down on me too much. I only dislike the lanterns here because they're not as pretty as the neon ones. Yu Xiang inwardly ridiculed, then raised her chin and looked forward. Many young boys and girls were gathered under the swaying lanterns, chatting and laughing. The air was filled with the smell of burning oil and a faint fragrance of incense. Children were frolicking around their feet, occasionally letting out bell-like laughter. The scene was very festive and lively. Yu Xiang couldn't help but lean forward. Yu Xiu, who was standing to the side, asked with a smile, "Xianger, do you want to go over? I'll push you." She forcefully pushed the wheelchair. Because the floor was paved with smooth marble, there wasn't much friction. The wheels gently slid forward, bringing Yu Xiang out of the shadows. Many people heard the rumbling sound of the wheelchair turning and looked over from afar. Their eyes were filled with curiosity, interest, and disdain. There were even a few noble ladies who were pointing at Yu Xiang's legs, their expressions constantly changing. It was clear that she was the main topic of their gossip. Yu Xiu smiled nastily and advised, "Xianger, come with me. Everyone hasn't seen you in a long time, so they must miss you. Today is a good opportunity to chat with them." If they really missed her, they would have visited the Marquis household several months ago. There was no need to wait until now. Yu Xiang was used to her crippled body, but that didn't mean that she was willing to be admired like a monkey. These people expressed sympathy for her on the surface, but secretly viewed her suffering as a hotbed to nourish their sense of pleasure and superiority. She, Yu Xiang, didn't need such a deformed and morbid friendship. "You go ahead. I'll stay here." She turned her face and carefully admired the crepe myrtle flowers beside her. Several noble ladies were waving at Yusiu. Their clothes and jewelry were all luxurious and noble. They must have come from prominent backgrounds. Yusiu didn't dare to delay. She left Yuxiang behind and walked over. With a crippled sister like me as a topic of conversation, Yusiu will definitely be very popular tonight. Yuxiang sneered and pointed to a quiet corner where the flowers bloomed the most beautifully. She ordered, "Push me over there." Although Tao Hong and Lulu felt sorry for their master, they also knew that she was very strong and didn't need to be comforted. They silently pushed her over. The master and servant trio stayed in the corner and looked at the shadows of the crowd. Up close, the flowers were like brocade. It was very carefree. After an unknown amount of time, the sound of footsteps came from the end of the dim path. Yuxiang turned her head and saw a 7 or 8-year-old chubby little girl slowly walking out from the shadows. She was holding a piece of pastry that she had taken a bite out of. Behind her was a stern-looking old mama. The little girl had 2 buns on her head. She had a round little face, a round nose, and round eyes. Her cheeks with baby fat were wriggling non-stop. There were a lot of pastry crumbs at the corner of her mouth, which fell down as she walked. She clearly didn't notice that there was someone here. When she saw Yuxiang, she was a little stunned. Her eyes widened even more, and her line of sight was fixed on Yuxiang's legs that were covered by the blanket. There was no disdain or contempt in her eyes, only curiosity. "Aya, where did this little ball roll from? It couldn't be any cuter." Yuxiang's heart was about to melt from her cuteness, but she put on a somewhat arrogant expression. She fiercely said, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a cripple before?" She liked to pretend to be a bad person to scare little children. She found it very amusing to see them cry out in fear or cry loudly with red noses. What kind of person is this? However, she forgot that she was also a little ball right now. For several months, she had been lying motionless, only caring about eating and sleeping well. Coupled with the nourishment of good fortune, her thin and weak body had grown a lot of soft meat. Her skin had become white and tender, fresh and delicious. Her ordinary facial features had grown, like a white sketch that had been painstakingly painted with all kinds of rich colors, becoming gorgeous. She bared her small white teeth, and her nose and eyes were squeezed together. Not only did she not look fierce, but she also looked somewhat comical. The old mama was about to scold this impudent and rude little girl, but she heard her master giggle. More pastry crumbs fell from the corner of her mouth. She crisply said, "I haven't seen it before." The old mama hurriedly shut her mouth and began to size up Yuxiang. Her master had been secretly harmed when she was born. Not only had she been born 3 months early, she had also been born with some fetal poison that could not be removed. She could only walk when she was 3 years old and could speak when she was 6 years old. Other than her parents and direct older brother, she never spoke half a word to anyone else. When she saw strangers, she would take a detour. Her personality was very reclusive, and her only hobby was eating. Today's palace banquet had been coerced and enticed in every possible way before she was willing to come. Who would have thought that she would actually take the initiative to talk to someone? The old mama's heart was filled with excitement. The moment little ball arrived, she smelled a sweet fragrance. It smelled like her favorite lotus seed cake. She couldn't help but walk closer to the source of the fragrance, revealing a drooling smile. Yuxiang clutched her chest. Her heart almost melted into water. This little ball's smile was too silly and cute. It was so cute that she wanted to scream and fiercely rub her round head. "Come here." She stretched out her sinful index finger and made a seductive gesture. "Elder sister will let you take a look at elder sister's crippled leg. Let elder sister rub it." Little ball thought for a bit and cheerfully nodded. The old mama at the side didn't dare to breathe loudly as she stared at the two. She was conflicted whether she should scold this daring little girl or allow her to interact with her master. Chapter 16. First, old lady Yu saw her own granddaughter speak viciously to the ninth princess, then coaxed the ninth princess to come closer. That slyness, vulgarity, on her face couldn't be concealed, and she really wanted to dig a hole to hide in. Hearing Her Majesty the Empress stifle her laughter, a bean-sized drop of cold sweat trickled down her forehead, afraid that this brat would continue to cause trouble. On the other hand, Yu Pinyin was very calm, and no expression could be seen on his sculpted handsome face. The Crown Prince and the Crown Princess also turned their faces away, their shoulders slightly shaking. The scene of two snowball-like little girls staring at each other was really too cute. Her leg became like this because she saved Yu Pinyin. Her Majesty the Empress asked in a low voice. Yes. Old lady Yu nodded. Can it still be cured? Director Shui has already examined it. He said that unless Master Ku Hui acts, there is no hope. Originally, there was still a Dr. Piao to rely on, but she missed the opportunity to save the Crown Prince. Old lady Yu couldn't mention this in front of the imperial family, otherwise, it would imply that she wanted to repay the favor. Even if she didn't mention it, Her Majesty the Empress wouldn't forget. She immediately expressed, "Don't worry, Ben Gong has already sent people to find Master Ku Hui. As long as the master is still in the human world, Ben Gong will definitely bring him back." Before old lady Yu could reply, Yu Pinyin had already bowed, his tone sincere. "This subject thanks Her Majesty the Empress for her great kindness on behalf of your sister." "Don't say this. It's also thanks to you that Qingxi, Crown Prince, could safely return to Ben Gong's side this time. The one who should say thanks should be Ben Gong." Her Majesty the Empress smiled and waved her hand, pointing at the cute little girl among the flowers, saying, "Yu Xiang is also a good one. She understands the importance of righteousness at such a young age. Ben Gong's little ball has the clearest thoughts. She can't be wrong to fall in love with someone at first sight." Old lady Yu repeatedly said that she didn't dare. Looking forward, the stone that had just been lifted from her heart was lifted again. She saw her granddaughter quickly lift the blanket, and before the ninth princess could react, she quickly covered it again. Then she chuckled as she rubbed the ninth princess's head. "What happened to taking a look? You damn child, the Empress is watching you, yet you dare to deceive the ninth princess." The ninth princess also felt that she had been deceived. She stared at Yu Xiang accusingly and said in a crisp voice, "I didn't see anything." "That's because you don't have good eyesight. Don't blame me." Yu Xiang smiled and said, "I'll show you one more time. Give me a bite of the pastry in your hand. Just one bite." She looked so round, she must be a foodie. The ninth princess was conflicted, but when she saw lotus seed cake smiling so beautifully, she reluctantly stretched out her hand. Yu Xiang didn't hold back at all. She swallowed all the pastries in one gulp, leaving only some crumbs on the ninth princess' fingertips. The ninth princess stared at her in shock. Her mouth was flat, her nose twitched, and her eyes were red. She revealed an adorable crying face. Old lady Yu stood behind the Empress and couldn't see her expression. She also didn't dare to turn around to look at the Crown Prince and Crown Princess's expressions. She only felt that her soul had left her body and her soul had ascended to heaven. She was almost scared to death by Yu Xiang, this brat. Yu Xiang laughed until she fell. She reached out to rub the ninth princess's head and coaxed, "Don't cry, don't cry. Jie was wrong. Jie will show you a magic trick. This time, you really have to watch carefully." The ninth princess stopped crying and looked up curiously. She saw her white hands move left and right in the floating light. Then with a snap of her fingers, a tender and beautiful camellia flower appeared out of thin air. She turned her hand and stuck it in her hair. A sweet fragrance wafted out from her fluttering hair. It smelled delicious. The ninth princess's nose twitched as she kept inhaling. She grabbed her hand and turned it over to look. The Empress made a sound of surprise. Seeing that her daughter was willing to take the initiative to interact with someone and her expression was so happy, her eyes couldn't help but moisten. Because her youngest daughter was born with a congenital deficiency, not only did she speak and walk later than normal people, her personality was also very antisocial. But because she was the most fragile and pure of all the children, the Empress loved her to the bone. Tonight's lantern banquet was ostensibly to celebrate the Empress' birthday, but it was secretly to find a study companion for her youngest daughter. But seeing her youngest daughter hide in a corner with no one around, the Empress thought that this matter was over. But unexpectedly, Yu Xiang jumped out. That quirky personality was a perfect complement to her youngest daughter. The Crown Prince gave a muffled laugh. Did you teach her this? You also liked to show off this when you were young. Yu Pinyin stared closely at the little girl who had conjured another camellia flower and pinned it on the 9th princess's hair. There was some pride in her voice. Xiang'er's movements are much faster than mine. The two little balls both had flowers on them. You look at me, I look at you, and they were very smug for a while. Yu Xiang asked, what's your name? I'm called Xiao Qiu, The 9th princess smiled foolishly. Yu Xiang gave a burst of shocking laughter. She laughed until her stomach cramped before panting, I'm called Xiao Xiang'er. Your name really matches you. Who gave you that name? You're too talented. The talented Empress covered her mouth to stifle her laughter. She softly said, Xiao Xiang'er may not be able to walk, but her personality is very cheerful and open-minded. Look at her forthright smile. Don't mention her mouth full of white teeth, even the little tongue in her throat could be seen. A normal girl really wouldn't be able to do it. Old Madame Yu was very guilty, replying Your Highness, because Xiang'er's legs are inconvenient, this subject thought to not use too many rules to bind her. Usually, I only taught her how to read and learn the Guqin, and didn't teach her too much etiquette. If I overstepped the rules, please forgive me, Your Highness. When the Empress heard this, she actually felt a sense of empathy. She raised the old madam's hand and patted it. It's very right for you to think this way. They are different from normal people, so naturally, they shouldn't be taught the same way as normal people. Life was already too inconvenient and difficult for them, so there was no need to put more burdens on their heads. Let them live their lives happily. When she said this, Her Highness the Empress looked towards the two laughing little girls not far away. She loved them even more. She smiled and waved her hand, let's go. Let them play freely. Qingxi and Pinyin, stay behind and watch. Don't follow too closely and let them discover you. The Crown Prince and Yu Pinyin bowed in acknowledgement. Old Madame Yu left with the Empress and the Crown Princess. When she entered the warm water pavilion where the noblewomen gathered, she received many envious gazes. The Empress sat in the pavilion for a while before going to rest. The Crown Princess followed suit and sent her off. The atmosphere in the pavilion instantly relaxed. A noblewoman with a round figure and a pretty face, dressed luxuriously walked to the old madam's side and sat down. She spoke in a low voice, Old Madam, it's time to talk about Full and Pinyin's marriage, right? Look, they're not young anymore. When the old madam saw her, her amiable expression immediately turned cold. Before Yu Pinyin was born, Old Master Ho and Old Duke Jingguo were betrothed to each other. It could be said that they were betrothed before they were born. As expected, they each gave birth to a boy and a girl. They were Yu Pinyin and Duke Jingguo Fu's second daughter, Chang Yafu. Duke Jingguo was a first-rank duke. He was in the emperor's heart. In terms of family status, he was even above Marquis Yongla. No matter how she looked at it, this marriage was a perfect match. The old madam was extremely satisfied with it. Unfortunately, Old Master Ho had died on the battlefield and his son had died to banditry. The Marquis household was in imminent danger and needed the help of their in-laws. In this era, people didn't care about age. It was common for people to start a family at the age of 11 or 12. If he married Duke Jingua Fu's daughter, it would be a great help to Yu Pinyin. The old madam had gone to Duke Jingua Fu several times, hoping to bring forward the marriage of the two children. However, she had been rejected by Duke Jingua, who had just inherited his title. Old Duke Jingua had been struck by a stroke. He couldn't move his body or speak, so he naturally couldn't help. The old madam was a shrewd person. How could she not know what Duke Jingguo was thinking? He was waiting for Marquis Yonla's battle for the title to come to an end. Whoever won in the end, he would betroth his daughter to that family. In short, he wouldn't let his daughter marry someone whose family had declined and who had failed to inherit his title. He was truly selfish and heartless. The old madam was furious. From then on, she cut off all contact with Duke Jingguo Fu. Who would have thought that Yu Pinyin would be so capable? At such a young age, he had defeated a group of uncles and was personally appointed as Marquis Yonla by the emperor. He wasn't any worse than his grandfather. Moreover, he had only been in court for a little more than a year, but he had already completed several beautiful tasks. The emperor had placed him in an even more important position. He was only 16 this year and hadn't even reached the age of 20. If he had a few more years of experience, what kind of situation would he have? If the crown prince ascended the throne, as the crown prince's most trusted official, what kind of situation would he have? Only then did Duke Jingguo become anxious. He ordered his wife, Madame Du, to bring gifts to discuss the marriage. However, they were all rejected by the old madam. The marriage contract was still in the old madam's hands. Yu Pinyin was deeply favored by the emperor and the crown prince. Duke Jingguo didn't dare to force him, nor did he dare to betroth his second daughter to someone else. Since the old madam wanted to waste time, they could only endure. They took the opportunity to ask for help, just like the old saying, karma goes round, retribution goes round. Yen hasn't even reached the age of 20 yet. It's still early. The old madam carelessly waved her hand. How could a girl be the same as a boy? They were both 16, but one hadn't even reached the age of 20 yet, and the other was already an old lady. How could they endure wasting time? Madame Du was so anxious that her heart and lungs were scratching, but she didn't dare to say anything harsh. She could only try her best to be careful. The old madam closed her eyes and listened for a long time. She coldly snorted, "In the past, you looked down on the Marquis household. Now, I also look down on your Duke Jing Fu. Rules aren't rules, di shu aren't di shu. In these years, you haven't made any contributions. You've only relied on the old duke's prestige to eat and drink. This marriage is really a bit unsuitable." Chapter 17. Yu Xiang changed a camellia flower here and there, causing Xiao Qiu to cry out in surprise. She didn't feel wronged when she swindled the whole box of pastries into her stomach. Instead, she stuck to her and refused to leave. The old mama was ordered to bring the 9th princess to interact with the noble ladies. Seeing her hiding in a corner and refusing to move, she was a bit anxious. The 9th princess was antisocial and extremely afraid of strangers. Unlike the other princesses, she didn't choose a study companion. Her Majesty the Empress could choose, but she had to like the person. In order to prevent the noble ladies from fawning over her and frightening her, Her Majesty the Empress specially changed her into the most ordinary dress. If there were still noble ladies who were willing to befriend the 9th princess without knowing the inside story and obtain the 9th princess's favor, this matter could be considered complete. The old mama's heart became lively, but when she swept her gaze over Yu Xiang's leg, she hesitated again. This must be Marquis Yonla's daughter. She sacrificed herself to save her brother. Her conduct was unquestionable, and she was also very quick-witted and intelligent. The difficult part was her leg. Entering the palace every day as a study companion was a pleasant task for others, but for her, it was a kind of torture. Forget it, she would go back and report to Her Majesty the Empress and let her make a decision. At this time, Yu Xiang, who still didn't know Xiao Qiu's identity, lifted the blanket to let the other party see her injured leg. Xiao Qiu squatted down and slowly reached out with her finger. She lightly poked it and then was greatly surprised. It's soft. So this rotten child thought that her leg was made of wood, so she couldn't walk. Yu Xiang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She pinched the tender flesh on her cheek and said, "Of course it's soft. Then why can't it walk?" The ninth princess blinked her large round eyes. Do you see? There were originally 2 gemstones here, but they were broken by bad people. I have to find a suitable gemstone to replace them with before I can walk. Yu Xiang pointed at her kneecap and spoke carelessly. She couldn't explain the principles of medicine to a 7 or 8-year-old child. Moreover, she would definitely be asked more questions until she went crazy. The old mama's mouth twitched. She had never seen a young lady who was so good at making up stories. The little ball was dumbstruck when it heard this. It kept fumbling around on Yu Xiang's kneecap as if it was looking at a miracle. After a long while, it straightened up, untied the pouch at its waist and handed it over. Here you go. A dark light flashed in the old nanny's eyes. Yu Xiang took the pouch and looked through it. Then, he chuckled. There were a few large gemstones inside. There were jadeite, colorful tourmaline, sparkling and translucent crystals, and smooth and glossy chalcedony. They were all very valuable. This child was too adorable. Hurry up and change. Little Ball poked her arm and urged. Yu Xiang shook his head. These gems are not suitable. She reached out to rub the child's disappointed expression and said with a smile, but I still have to thank Little Ball. Don't worry, my brother will help me find a suitable gem. One day, I will stand up again. As she spoke, she tied the purse back to the child's waist and glanced at the old nanny with a faint smile. What did this person take her, Yu Xiang, for? A piece of trash who made up stories to cheat a child's money? In her previous life, even the shoes she wore were studded with diamonds. Why would she care about such a small thing? Ridiculous. The old nanny lowered her head, feeling very embarrassed. The graceful bearing and forceful aura of the young lady raised by the eternal joy Marquis manner was indeed the same as the young Marquise. On the other hand, she had a small nose and small eyes that were not presentable. If Nyang Nyang knew, she would be so ashamed that she wanted to die. Little Ball couldn't see the undercurrent between the two. She stroked the pouch in disappointment and asked, how do you put it in after you find it? Here, like this. Yu Xiang put a copper coin in the palm of her hand and patted it on her kneecap. When she opened her hand again, the copper coin disappeared without a trace. Little Ball stared blankly at it. Yu Xiang patted her kneecap again and put her white palm under her eyes. The copper coin rested on her palm again. Little Ball sucked in a breath. For words appeared on her forehead, "You're a real god." Even the experienced and knowledgeable old nanny was greatly amazed. She thought to herself that in the entire capital, there was no one more intelligent than Marquis Yongle, the legitimate daughter. What a pity, what a pity, the crown prince pointed at Yu Xiang, who was stuffing the copper coin into his little sister's pouch, and said in a low voice, "It's a pity for your little sister. She was so intelligent, cheerful, and open-minded. She also had many wonderful ideas." If the current noble ladies were like meticulous paintings, Yu Xiang was like a splash-inked painting, casual and free. She could accommodate all kinds of rich and unruly colors. If her legs were intact, how graceful would she be in a few years? The crown prince shook his head regretfully. Yu Pinyan's sculpted face finally showed a hint of pain. He thought, even if I owe anyone in this life, I can't afford to owe Xiang or anything. Little Ball was amused. She grabbed onto Yu Xiang and let her continue her performance. Fortunately, her legs gradually lost feeling as her wounds healed. Otherwise, Yuxiang would be in unspeakable pain right now. She patted and changed. On the 23rd time, she finally broke down. She pointed at the bright lanterns not far away and asked hopefully, "Let's go see the palace lanterns." Little Ball pursed her lips. Her eyes revealed a panicked and uneasy expression. Yuxiang seemed to have understood something. This child was very antisocial and afraid of strangers. No wonder she was willing to stay in a corner with her. If it was another 7 or 8-year-old child, they would have already run away like a monkey. "How about we walk along the small path and look at the lanterns through the corridor?" She didn't want to pat her kneecaps again even if she was beaten to death. As the saying goes, lift a rock and smash your own foot. Today, she took out a copper coin and patted her own foot. The nature of her suffering was the same. Little Ball stood on her tiptoes to take a look. Flowers and trees were planted on both sides of the path, making the shadows indistinct. There was also a narrow corridor separating the crowd. Not only was it quiet, but one could also see the bright lights on the opposite side through the window. It was a good place to go. She pondered for a moment and slowly nodded. Yuxiang hurriedly asked the 2 young maidservants to push her wheelchair. When she turned around, she patted her chest in relief. However, she didn't know that the old nanny and her 2 elder brothers were already laughing in secret. She was such an astute person, but she was still completely under Little Ball's control. Sure enough, there was always something to subdue her. The 2 of them walked quietly for a while. They saw that there were also a few palace lanterns hanging on the osmanthus tree in front of them. Because the place was too remote, no one noticed them. The 2 of them walked over and pretended to admire the lanterns for a moment. Yuxiang shook her head. "These words aren't as good as my brother's. They're also not as good as my brother's." Little Ball nodded seriously. Yuxiang glanced at her and pointed at another lantern. "This painting isn't as good as my brother's. The artistic conception is far inferior. They're also not as good as my brother's. My brother is the best. You're the best." Little Ball gave a thumbs up, but felt that it wasn't enough and gave another one. "My brother is also the best. You're the best." Yuxiang mischievously argued with her. "Your brother isn't good." Little Ball was a bit anxious and her little chubby hands moved quickly. "Your brother isn't good either." Yuxiang was laughing in her heart, but on the surface, she put on a proud expression. This little brat was really interesting to tease. Look, her eyes were red with anger, but her mouth was clumsy and she couldn't speak. Little Ball stammered for a long time before finally squeezing out a sentence. Your brother isn't as good as my brother. Your brother isn't as good as my brother." Yuxiang quickly retorted. Seeing Little Ball sniffing her little nose and pouting her little mouth, revealing a cute crying face, she was laughing so hard in her heart that she almost couldn't breathe. The old mama glanced at her with a sympathetic gaze and inwardly sneered, if this little girl knew that her master's brother was the current crown prince, who knows if she would faint from fright. Yuxiang's bad taste was satisfied and she hurriedly pulled Little Ball to her side. She vigorously rubbed her head and coaxed her in a good voice, Okay, your brother is the best. You're the best. In every little sister's heart, their brother is the best. Both of our brothers are the best. Little Ball thought for a moment and smiled through her tears. This child also has a brother complex. No wonder we hit it off so well. Yuxiang pinched the tip of her red nose and also smiled. Only the heavens knew that the truth of the matter was a strange auntie bullying a little child to satisfy her own bad taste. But in the eyes of the bystanders, it was 2 cute little girls defending their elder brother. The scene couldn't be more warm and cute. Not to mention that the old nanny's stern face softened, even the 2 brothers who were hiding in the dark couldn't wait to rush up and hold their baby in their arms and dote on her. The two of them reconciled and continued to walk around the osmanthus tree. Soon, they reached the end of the corridor. Without the brick wall and the hollow window lattice blocking them, the dim flickering light and the sound of laughter and playing rushed over. A phoenix-shaped palace lantern hung from the highest point of the eaves. The outer shell was wrapped in colorful crystals and the base was inlaid with all kinds of gems. Under the flickering candlelight, the lantern cast specks of colorful light. The effect was even more dazzling than a disco ball light. Yuxiang couldn't help but take a few more glances. Little Ball excitedly shouted, "Ah, that's my lantern. I have to take it back." She took 2 steps and saw the crowd in front of her. She slowly retreated and her little face revealed a sad expression. "It's a pity that my brother isn't here. Otherwise, I could help you win it." Yuxiang only thought that the child had taken a liking to that palace lantern and shook her head regretfully. That was the Lantern King tonight. It could be taken away by someone, but the prerequisite was that they passed the Empress test. The test required 2 people to complete together. One person would be on the temporary balcony and pick out a few items that the palace servant had specified and put them into a box, letting the other person guess. The first time, it was one of 2. The second time, it was one of 3. In the end, it was one of 12. Each time, it was guessed that the side would take the Lantern King home. There was no doubt that the Empress's item was valuable. It was definitely rare in the world. Many people's eyes turned red. They all jumped onto the stage, but all of them returned empty-handed. The first time, the success rate was 50%. The second time, it was 33%. The third time, it was 20%, and they couldn't make a single mistake. After calculating, the success rate was less than 1 in 100,000. It was as difficult as buying a lottery ticket. Unless the 2 really had telepathy or bribed the palace servant to cheat, it was impossible to pass this test. Chapter 18. Xiao Qiu saw many people running onto the stage and staring at her lantern, clearly wanting to take it away. Although she was anxious, she didn't dare go over. She grabbed Yuxiang's sleeve and said, "Where's your older brother? Go find him." If there was any trouble, she could just find her older brother. At first, Yu Pinyin was far away, so Yuxiang did not notice him. When they were about to walk out of the handwriting veranda, the closer he got to her, the more she sensed it. She knew that he was worried about her and was guarding her in the dark. "I also don't know where my older brother is. But when I count to 3, he will definitely appear. Just watch." Yuxiang's smile was especially sly. "She discovered us?" The crown prince was very surprised. Yu Pinyin nodded and walked out of the flower bushes with a low laugh. He quickly walked towards the little girl who had already counted to 2 and was currently pouting at him with her chin raised. "My dear older brother, you finally appeared." Yuxiang stretched out her hands. Yu Pinyin naturally bent down and let her hug his neck. His usually cold and stern face was filled with a gentle smile. When he got close to her neck, he took a deep breath without leaving a trace. It was still that smell that made him feel incomparably at ease and happy. Xiao Qiu quickly hid behind the old mama and stuck out half her head to look at Lotus Seed Cake's older brother. She secretly thought, this person doesn't look like Lotus Seed Cake at all. He even looks a bit scary. The Empress intentionally concealed the identity of the 9th princess, so Yu Pinyin didn't salute and only nodded at the old mama. The old mama bowed in greeting. The lantern. The 9th princess stared at Yuxiang. "Older brother, let's go up and try." Yuxiang withdrew from Yu Pinyin's embrace and pointed at the balcony not far away that was filled with people. This lantern was the 9th princess's beloved item. The Empress threatened to give it away in order to trick the 9th princess into Shiha Garden. Of course, this was just an empty threat. How could the Empress bear to make her daughter sad? Thus, she set up an impossible test. Many people had already tried before, but none of them succeeded. At most, they were stopped at the fifth trial. No matter how close they were, how could they truly live in each other's hearts? How many questions could he and Xiang'er guess correctly? Yu Pinyin thought to himself with interest as he pushed Yu Xiang into the crowd. The ninth princess paced back and forth again and finally overcame the fear in her heart. She ran with her short legs and followed closely behind Yu Xiang, using her wheelchair to cover her small body. The crown prince stood in the shadows and looked at his sister's plump back. He smiled silently. With Yifeng's protection, he was not worried at all. If he went over, he would definitely attract a large crowd. At that time, Chou'er would be frightened. Yu Xiang's wheelchair was a great tool to open up a path. Wherever it passed, the crowd automatically moved to the side. Because Yu Pinyin was also there, no one dared to brazenly look at Yu Xiang. However, the occasional piercing gaze was enough to make people feel uncomfortable. The gentleness on Yu Pinyin's face had already been replaced by coldness. He bent down to his sister's ear and comforted her, "Big brother is here, don't be afraid." "I'm not afraid." Yu Xiang waved her hand. She noticed that there was a group of young ladies not far away who were looking at her with shining eyes. The other party was very tall. The places that should be thin were thin as if there were no bones, and the places that should be plump were curvaceous. Especially her face, it was as beautiful as a peony in full bloom in spring. It was incomparably gorgeous. Out of all the young ladies, she was the most dazzling. She attracted countless gazes of admiration, and jealousy. She didn't care at all. She stood there openly and allowed people to size her up. There was a bit of pride in her eyes. However, when she saw Yu Pinyin, her expression changed. Her watery eyes hid countless complex and indescribable emotions. It seemed like resentment, anger, and love. Yu Pinyin glanced at her indifferently, as if she was nothing more than a speck of dust. Her face immediately turned as white as paper. She bit her lower lip and clutched her lapel, as if she had suffered a great blow. There was a story between these two. Yu Xiang hurriedly searched through Yu Xiang's memories and found that he had never seen such a beauty before. The great Han dynasty was relatively open. Young men and women didn't avoid meeting in public before marriage. It was only after entering the inner chambers or after marriage that there were all kinds of annoying rules. Yu Xiu stood next to the young lady. She was tugging on her sleeve and wanted to come over and talk. She waved her hand and hid behind the crowd. Yu Xiu hesitated for a moment. Seeing that her brother's expression was really cold, she also hid. That person had a close relationship with Yu Xiu. Presumably, they had some relationship with the Marquis household. However, Yu Xiang was a fool. She didn't know anything other than playing wildly. Yu Xiang was somewhat discouraged. She grabbed Yu Pinyin's sleeve and asked, "Brother, who was that person?" "Don't worry about an unimportant person." Yu Pinyin pinched her chin and turned her face towards the balcony. The pair of beautiful sisters up there had already failed. "Is there anyone else who wants to come up and try?" The palace attendant in charge asked loudly. "Yes." Yu Xiang's answer was full of energy. She even raised her left hand high. Yu Pinyin looked at her with a strange gaze. Even with a broken leg, she could still be so carefree and uninhibited. She was cheerful and open-minded. Xiang'er's strength had always surprised him. As such, it was unnecessary to leave her alone in the garden today. The legitimate son of the Shenwei general's family also had a broken leg and was unable to walk. He was a good man, but in just 3 days, he had become so thin that he didn't even look human anymore. Moreover, there were rumors that he had attempted suicide several times. On the other hand, although Xiang had secretly cried before, she didn't show any signs of depression in front of outsiders. She had put on quite a bit of weight in the past 3 or 4 months, and her complexion had also become rosier. She was truly very relaxed. As her older brother, he was extremely proud. Yu Pinyin rubbed his precious little sister's small head and steadily walked up to the balcony. The palace attendant bowed and then presented a tray. He showed the 2 items on the tray to Yu Xiang and the crowd below the balcony. He then took out a 2-foot square box and said, "Master Ho, please choose 1 item and put it in the box." A palace attendant on each side pulled up a piece of black cloth to completely cover the table. No matter how eager the audience below the balcony looked, they couldn't see his actions. Yu Pinyin looked at the tray and smiled with his eyes narrowed. There were 2 pearl hairpins. One was a pearl hairpin with 5 phoenixes hanging in the morning sun, and the other was a gold-plated peony hairpin inlaid with treasure. Both were exquisitely made and very expensive. It was hard to tell which one was better and which one was worse. He didn't pick and choose like the others. After hesitating for a while, he reached out and put one of the hairpins in the box. Xiang loved flowers the most, so she would definitely like this peony hairpin. The palace attendant looked at him several times. He was so straightforward. Was he too confident, or did he not plan to win? As soon as the black cloth was put down, Yu Xiang shouted crisply from below the balcony, "Peony hairpin." The palace attendant was stunned for a moment before opening the box. There was no doubt that it was a peony hairpin. The first round was very easy to pass, so the crowd didn't find it strange. However, it was really the first pair to pass so quickly. The second tray was presented. This time, there were 3 wooden carved sheep. The shapes were different, symbolizing the opening of the 3 suns. One was lying down, one was standing, and one was standing. Behind the curtain, Yu Pinyin put the lying sheep into the box without thinking. Xiang always liked to lie on the soft couch by the window and look at the scenery. She didn't want to go anywhere. Although it was partly because of the inconvenience of her legs, her satisfied expression betrayed her laziness. Of the 3 sheep, this was definitely the one that suited her the most. The curtain was put down again. Just as the palace attendant raised his hand to signal Yu Xiang to speak, she directly shouted, "Lying sheep." Whether it was the person who chose or the person who guessed, they were all so fast that they practically raised their hands and shouted. The crowd became interested and stared at the box with shining eyes. The palace attendant opened the box. As expected, the 2 had guessed correctly again. Amidst the uproar, the 3rd tray was presented. On it were 4 small embroidered screens with plum blossoms, orchids, bamboo, and chrysanthemums. Yu Pinyin only glanced at it and then chuckled. Was there even a need to guess? It was definitely orchids. Didn't you see that Xiang specially opened a flower garden in the back of her courtyard to grow orchids? This time, it only took him a few breaths to pass the test. Then, it was time for the 5 grains of bumper harvest. Yu Pinyin chose rice, Yu Xiang's favorite. Among the 6 arts, there was the scepter that represented etiquette, the sun that represented music, the miniature bow and arrow that represented archery, the ceramic pony that represented imperial control, the book of songs that represented writing, and the abacus that represented numbers. Yu Pinyin chose music, which Yu Xiang was most interested in. Among the 7 colored beads, Yu Pinyin chose yellow, which was Yu Xiang's favorite color. The 2 of them cooperated well and guessed correctly, causing the people below the stage to cry out in surprise. When the last 12 items were placed on the table, Yu Pinyin really couldn't hold back his laughter. Xiang was born in the year of the rabbit. Was there even a need to choose these 12 zodiac figurines? The test that seemed impossible to others was so simple in his and Xiang's eyes. That's right, who else in this world could be like him and Xiang, who already understood each other to the bone? Thinking about each other's thoughts, thinking about each other's thoughts. They clearly weren't bound by blood, but there seemed to be an invisible thread that connected their hearts together. This feeling was very subtle, but also very pleasing. Yu Pinyin stuffed the Phoenix Palace lantern into his sister's hands amidst the crowd's exclamations. The body doesn't have the wings of a colorful phoenix, but our hearts are as one. Brother, we won. Yu Xiang raised the lantern and used the phoenix's sharp beak to touch the youth's beautifully shaped thin lips. This time, it was like pecking at the tip of her heart. It was very refreshing and numbing. Yu Pinyin bent down and used his fingers to rub his sister's full lips. He smiled with squinted eyes. A thick warmth flowed around the two of them. Unfortunately, there was someone who didn't have eyes. Half of her head poked out and weakly shouted, "Lantern." Yu Xiang returned to her senses and stuffed the extraordinarily exquisite palace lantern into Xiao Qiu's hands. Full of loyalty, she said, "Here, take it and play with it." Not to mention that this palace lantern was made by a famous craftsman, it was the only one in the world. Chapter 19. There were many people setting up lanterns by the river. Knowing that Xiao Qiu was afraid of strangers, Yu Xiang deliberately chose a quiet corner. The lotus-shaped lanterns floated all over the river, and the colorful lights rose and fell on the river surface. It was as if the 9 heavens and the galaxy had fallen into the human world, beautiful like a dream. There were also mosquitoes and moths that gathered around the lanterns, buzzing and flapping their wings above the lanterns, causing a school of silver fish to hear the sound and jump out of the water to hunt for food. Refined people only felt that the lanterns were beautiful, the water was beautiful, the people were beautiful, and the galaxy in the heavens and the earth was even more beautiful. Vulgar people felt that the scene of fish hunting for food was much more beautiful than the river of candles. Yu Xiang and Xiao Qiu were the only 2 vulgar people in this Shiha garden. A huge carp jumped out of the water, catching a moth in its mouth before falling back, splashing bright water. Xiao Qiu was unable to contain her joy and clapped. Yu Xiang supported her cheek with one hand and muttered while licking her lips, "This fish is at least 2 caddies heavy, and it grows in such a clear river, so its meat is absolutely delicious. It would be great if we could fish it up and make it into sweet and sour carp." She rubbed her stomach and sighed deeply, "You don't say, I'm really a bit hungry." Foodies always appreciated each other, so Xiao Qiu hurriedly nodded in agreement, "I'm also hungry." Her master hadn't had so much fun in a long time, so the old mama giggled and said, "Please wait a moment, this servant will bring some food over." Because Yu Xiang's 2 maidservants were also here, and this was the imperial garden, she walked with ease. Who would have thought that as soon as she left, a group of young ladies with unkind expressions came over. The leader was about 12 or 13 years old and was dressed very luxuriously. Everyone followed behind her in a staggered 2 steps, seemingly taking her as their leader. The beautiful young lady and Yu Xiu that Yu Xiang had seen before were also mixed in with the crowd. "Give me the lantern." When they got close, the girl directly stretched out her hand to Xiao Qiu, her tone was quite arrogant. Xiao Qiu jumped in fright and hurriedly hid behind Yu Xiang, shaking her head firmly. Lu Lu from Tao Hong stepped forward to stop them, but he was dragged behind by the 2 old women brought by the girl. They even covered his mouth with a handkerchief. This action was done in one go, and he was quite skilled. The Nirvana sacred lamp is a tribute from Tintu to the great Han dynasty. There's only one in the world and it's priceless. Do you think you're worthy of it? Give it to me. She took a few steps forward aggressively. Xiao Qiu quickly hid on the other side of Yu Xiang. When the girl saw that she was unwilling to give it to her, she was a little angry and wanted to snatch it away. Although Yu Xiang liked children, she really couldn't bring herself to like those unreasonable brats. Her temper was also extremely protective. She immediately became angry, pushed the girl away, and sneered, "How dare you bully my Qiu and take my girl? Do you believe that I won't splash lamp oil on your face? How dare you? Do you know who I am? I am Commandery Princess Qinghe." My father is Prince Yu. The girl staggered from the push and shouted at the top of her lungs. So what if you're a commandery princess? We won this lantern fair and square, and it's also a reward from the Empress. What do you mean by trying to snatch it without even asking? In the Imperial Garden, you captured another family's servant for no reason. What do you mean by that? Could it be that a commandery princess like you can go against the Empress and the laws of the Great Han Dynasty? Yu Xiang took the lantern from Xiao Qiu's hands and held it out to the river. She smiled contemptuously. Even if I throw it into the river to feed the fish, I won't give it to you for free. If you have the ability, then come and snatch it. The lantern was getting closer and closer to the water. If she really went forward to snatch it, she might also fall into the river to feed the fish. Commandery Princess Qinghe was so angry that her entire body trembled. Her fingertips trembled as she pointed at Yu Xiang, but she couldn't say a word. Her father was Prince Yu, the emperor's uncle. He controlled 800,000 soldiers and could be considered one of the most powerful nobles in the Great Han Dynasty. Wherever she went, she was flattered and tried to curry favor. Today, she kicked an iron plate. Even a little cripple dared to talk back to her. How preposterous! Which family are you from? She gritted her teeth and asked. Guess. Yu Xiang covered her mouth and chuckled. Xiao Qiu stuck out half of her head and also chuckled. With the lotus seed cake, she wasn't afraid at all. Commandery Princess Qinghe was so angry at the two people's contemptuous attitude that she fell backwards. Just as she was about to explode in anger, she saw Duke Jinghua's second daughter, Chang Yafu, step out from the crowd. She said softly, Commandery Princess, please calm down. This is Marquis Yomla's younger sister, Yu Xiang. Please don't argue with her for my sake. Without waiting for Commandery Princess Qinghe to respond, she went forward and squatted in front of Yu Xiang. She said patiently, Xiang, sister has a set of white jade bell phoenix hairpins. It's made of 36 delicate ornaments and was made by the famous craftsman Fu Xilin. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's a masterpiece. How about sister exchange that hairpin with you? The lamp looks okay now, but after a long time, the inner wall will be covered with black lamp oil and it won't have the luster it has today. It's not as practical as that hairpin. After saying this, she pinched Yu Xiang's fingertips. Her attitude was very intimate. If it was the original Yu Xiang, she would naturally be willing to exchange a useless lamp for a set of exquisite jewelry. However, the current Yu Xiang was stubborn. She would rather throw away her own things than let an outsider take them. She only looked at the girl and sneered, Who are you? Do I know you? The girl's face was pale. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. Yu Xiang, this is Fu's older sister. She's engaged to Big Brother. You don't know your future sister-in-law. Yu quickly stepped forward to explain. It would have been better if she didn't explain. Once she did, the girl's expression became even more embarrassed. Yu Xiang quickly searched Yu Xiang's memories. After a long time, she finally found some information. This Fu's older sister was the second legitimate daughter of Duke Jinghua's manor. She was indeed engaged to Yu Pinyin. In her early years, she had come to the Marquis household a few times. Later, as the dispute over the title became more and more intense, she stopped coming. Yu Xiang had never met her before, so she naturally didn't know her. However, from her memories, she knew that the old ancestor had been ill for more than a month because this granddaughter-in-law wanted to break off the engagement. As long as the old ancestor didn't agree to the title of future sister-in-law, it wouldn't fall on her head. She didn't stand up to protect her sister-in-law earlier. Instead, she waited until the conflict intensified to curry favor with both sides. This person was quite scheming. It was no wonder that she played the game of waiting for the right price back then. Yu Xiang's impression of the girl immediately fell to the bottom. She sneered, when my things were robbed, Fu's older sister didn't stand up for me. Now, you're playing the peacemaker. You used an ordinary set of jade hairpins to exchange for my priceless palace lantern. You want me to remember your favor. This abacus is really loud. Do you really think I'm a fool? Now you're helping an outsider to cheat sister-in-law's things. In the future, when you marry into the family, what will happen? You'll torture sister-in-law to death. That's right. You're a heartless person. In the past, when my brother was in trouble, you didn't help him at all. Instead, you wanted to distance yourself from him. I can't count on you now. Chang Yafu's method wasn't bad. It was just that he was more inclined towards Qinghe Commandery Princess. Moreover, he didn't forget to help her gain some favor. If it were someone else, they might have reluctantly agreed. However, Yu Xiang could eat anything but a loss. If they wanted to snatch things from her, they had to be prepared to be scratched until their faces bled. She pursed her lips and blinked her eyes. Many tears appeared in her eyes. She choked and said, "You're a group of healthy people. You're ganging up to bully a cripple like me. My future sister-in-law is also among you. You're blood-related sisters. Are you trying to force me to death? Fine. Anyway, I have no reason to live. I might as well throw myself into the river today and help you." After she finished speaking, she rolled the wheelchair with difficulty and slowly walked into the river. Her whole body was filled with unspeakable sorrow. Tao Hong Lu was pressed against the stone table by two old women and couldn't move. She cried anxiously. Qinghe Commandery Princess was really scared by her. Clearly, she was sharp-tongued and aggressive a second ago. In the next second, she was crying and disheartened. Even flipping a book couldn't compare to her changing her face faster. What did she want to do? Throw herself into the river in the Imperial Garden? She wanted to drag everyone down with her. Just as she reached out to stop her, there was another person who changed her face even faster. She saw the anxious-looking little ball tightly tugging on Yu Xiang's sleeve. She opened her mouth and wailed loudly. As she cried, she shouted mournfully, "Brother, come quickly. Someone's bullying little ball. Someone's trying to force lotus seed cake to death." "Who's the lotus seed cake you're talking about? You can't give him a nickname behind his back." Yu Xiang had been acting. When he heard little ball's devilish voice, he really couldn't keep up the act. He held back his tears and stared at her, dumbfounded. Her voice was loud and clear. The entire Shihe garden could probably hear her. She originally wanted to scare this group of children and make them retreat. Great, now the matter had completely blown up. Fine, she'd better think about how to smear others and clear her name in front of the Empress. Fortunately, her brother saved the Crown Prince. As a cripple, she was in the right and shouldn't be at a disadvantage. She was just afraid that she would offend Prince Yu's estate and cause trouble for her brother in the future. She wiped her face, and her mournful expression instantly turned into one of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Seeing that these two were so tactless, and not only did they not take the initiative to offer lanterns, they even made the matter worse. Princess Qinghe panicked and threatened, "Today is Her Majesty's birthday. One of you is wailing and the other is jumping into the river. You're deliberately making trouble for Her Majesty. Don't you know the rules? Do you have any manners? Stop fooling around. Do you want to die?" Everyone tried to dissuade him. "Yu Xiang, even if you want to die, don't implicate the Marquis household. Come quickly." Yu Xiu was so angry that smoke came out of his head. Yu Xiang's personality was truly becoming more and more unrestrained. He didn't even look at the situation before causing trouble. "Is Qiu's upbringing good? Why don't you go and ask my imperial father and imperial mother?" A low voice came from behind. Princess Qinghe was shocked and hurriedly turned back to look. She saw the crown prince standing with his hands behind his back. Although there was a gentle smile on his lips, his eyes were surging with icy fury. Marquis Yongle quickly walked out from behind him. His face was so gloomy that it could drip water. "Brother!" The two little girls cried out pitifully and reached out their hands to their older brothers. The Crown Prince and Upinion each picked up their precious little sisters and left. The group of noble maidens acted as if they had seen ghosts and hurriedly opened a path for them. They watched as they walked further and further away. Lulu of Tao Hong broke free from the old woman's grip and lifted her skirt to chase after them. "I heard that Her Majesty the Empress intends to choose a study companion for the 9th princess today. You have to perform well." Princess Qinghe suddenly remembered what her mother had told her before she left. She had snatched the lantern from the 9th princess. That was the 9th princess. The Emperor, Empress, and Crown Prince, the three most powerful people in the Great Han Dynasty, all loved the 9th princess like a treasure. How could this end? Thinking of this, Princess Qinghe felt her scalp tingle. Yu Xiu and Chang Yaofu turned their heads and saw the matriarch standing on the embankment with an unfathomable expression. Their faces also turned pale. "Old madam, this. Duchess Jingguo's wife had a bellyful of praises for her daughter, but she couldn't spit out a single word. Yu Xiang's accusations just now were truly heartrending. What did he mean by, "She hasn't even married into the family yet"? What did he mean by, "heartless," and, "can't be counted on"? The matriarch's eyebrows rose when she heard this. If it wasn't for the fact that the embankment was narrow and inconvenient, she would have already rushed down. But before she could rush down, the Crown Prince and Marquis Yongle arrived first. This made the situation even worse. What kind of evil was this? Duchess Jingguo was angry and anxious. Chapter 20. Yu Xiang crouched on Upinion's shoulder and looked at those stiff and ashen-faced maidens. She smiled at them and pretended to be sad as she buried her face in her brother's neck. Then she remembered Xiao Qiu's true identity and couldn't help but be shocked. When that pouch full of gems was handed over, Yu Xiang knew that the other party's background was not simple. But in the entire Shihe garden, who had a simple background? Therefore, she didn't think too much about it. She never thought that Xiao Qiu, who only had an old mama with her and was dressed simply and plainly, would be the 9th princess of the current dynasty. The 9th princess who was protected so tightly by the Emperor, Empress, and Crown Prince. Xiao Qiu's pronunciation was close to Jiu, and with her round body, this nickname was too appropriate. She turned to look at the siblings walking in front of her and saw that Xiao Qiu was still sobbing, looking very pitiful. Did this child really think that she was going to jump into the river and was scared stiff? Yu Xiang felt a little guilty. Upinion mistakenly thought that she was afraid and patted her back to comfort her. "Don't be afraid, brother is here. No one can bully you." "Brother, did I cause trouble for you?" "Her father is Prince Yu." This was an era where, with a good father in hand, I have the world. Prince Yu stubbornly defended his fief in the northwest and refused to return to the capital. The emperor had sent 3 imperial edicts and ignored them. Everyone knew what Sima Zhao's intentions were. In less than a year and a half, the emperor would make a move against him. His original wife and daughter in the capital had long been abandoned and no one knew how they would die in the future. Upinion's bottomless eyes quietly leaked a trace of viciousness. He rubbed his sister's head and said in a low voice, "No problem, I, Marquis Yongle, am not afraid of offending Prince Yu's Fu." Yu Xiang smiled in satisfaction. In Phoenix Perching Pavilion, the Empress sat in the main seat and the Crown Princess accompanied her in the guest seat. Seeing the sobbing Xiao Qiu, they both stood up to welcome her. Yu Xiang couldn't salute and could only clasp her hands in front, her expression neither servile nor overbearing. The Empress smiled and said, "Good child." Then she took her youngest daughter into her arms and patted her. She asked gently, "Qiu, what's wrong? Who bullied you?" Yu Xiang looked down calmly. They stole my lantern and wanted to hit me. Lotus seed cake protected me. They wanted to force lotus seed cake to death and make lotus seed cake jump into the river. Little Ball sniffled and narrated. Yu Xiang really wanted to rush up and kiss this fat ball. With just a few words, that group of people had fallen into a trap. Indeed, she was naturally evil to the extreme. The Empress originally had a faint smile on her face, but when she heard this, her face immediately turned cold. Yu Xiang lowered her head slightly and blinked her eyes. Tears flowed out of her eyes, and the way she held them in her eyes made her look especially pitiful. She just sat there and didn't say a word, but others felt that she had suffered a great grievance. Don't cry. Imperial Mother will uphold justice for you. I heard from Mama that you want to eat sweet and sour carp. The Imperial Chef has already prepared it. Go wash your face and eat with Yu and lotus seed cake. The Empress gently wiped her daughter's tears and patted her chubby little butt. Hearing that there was food, Little Ball instantly smiled and waved at Yu Xiang with tears in her eyes. Yu Xiang turned to look at her elder brother. Seeing him nod slightly, she followed. Just as she walked out of the door, she saw an imperial concubine leading a group of noble maidens in slowly. The Qinghe commandery princess, who had been insufferably arrogant earlier, was now like a quail that had fallen into water. She was trembling and crying. Chang Yafu looked calm, but his steps were a bit shaky. Yu followed behind them with her head lowered. Hearing the rumbling sound of the wheelchair, she quickly looked up, her eyes full of pleading. Yu Xiang raised her chin, raised her index finger, and lightly drew a line on her neck. Seeing Yu's instantly distorted face, she smiled evilly. The Qinghe commandery princess and Chang Yafu clearly saw her threatening action and both widened their eyes. This person was a little too vicious and evil. With just a few words, he had plotted against all of them. If she had said the 9th princess's identity earlier, everything would have been fine. She was deliberately messing with them. After this incident, the second young Miss Marquis Yomla's notoriety spread. She was fierce, cunning, and very good at pretending to be innocent. Ordinary noble maidens didn't dare to have a close relationship with her. They were afraid that she would stab them in the back. Of course, they also didn't dare to offend her because she had a strong backing. While Yu Xiang and Little Ball were enjoying the food, a group of noble maidens were kneeling in the Phoenix Pavilion to be scolded. The Qinghe commandery princess was grounded for 3 months, and the others were punished to copy scriptures 100 times. This punishment wasn't harsh, but the Empress' words of not having good morals were enough to make them unable to turn over a new leaf for several years. Those who were engaged were afraid that their in-laws would break off the engagement, and those who weren't were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get married. They were so regretful that their intestines turned green. After taking care of everything, the Empress strolled to the side hall and peeked at the 2 maidens eating through the hollowed-out screen. In order to prevent the 9th princess from eating too much at once, she only prepared 3 mouthfuls of each dish and put them in small white jade cups. One of them was pretending to cry, and the other was really crying. They both consumed a lot of energy. At this moment, they were eating very happily and quickly swept up all kinds of dishes. There was only a braised lion's head left. Little Ball reached out to pick it up, but Yu Xiang poked it away with her chopsticks and put it in her mouth as if she was going to swallow it. Little Ball looked at it eagerly. Yu Xiang handed the lion's head to her. Little Ball was overjoyed and opened her mouth to bite it, but Yu Xiang took the lion's head back the moment she was about to bite it. Little Ball only bit a ball of air. Her upper teeth knocked against her lower teeth, making a crisp crunching sound. Then, with tears in her eyes, she looked at her accusingly. Yu Xiang put on a straight face and handed over the chopsticks again. Little Ball once again bit a ball of air. After teasing her like this 3 times, Little Ball was fooled each time. Yu Xiang really couldn't take it anymore and leaned on the table with a smile. Seeing that she looked so pitiful when she couldn't eat it and wanted to eat it, she put the lion's head into her mouth in exchange for a grateful smile. Old Lady Yu, who came with the Empress, was very embarrassed. She could only turn her Buddhist beads and lower her head to recite sutras. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. But the Empress didn't feel angry at all. Instead, she covered her mouth and chuckled. Even though she already knew Little Ball's identity, she could still get along with her so generously and naturally. She didn't bow and scrape, didn't flatter, didn't lower herself. There was no false enthusiasm in her eyes, only true love for her daughter. She could make her daughter cry and laugh, making her become very lively. This had greatly exceeded the Empress' expectations. This child was very good. Little Ball needed this kind of eccentric playmate to prevent her personality from becoming more and more eccentric. The Empress stopped laughing and beckoned to Old Lady Yu, walking towards the main hall. After sitting down, she got straight to the point. Old Yu Matriarch, Ben Gong has taken a liking to this granddaughter of yours. Send her to the palace to be Little Nine's companion. Old Lady Yu hesitated, her leg. The Empress waved her hand. It's fine. Just send a few more mamas to serve her. Old Lady Yu thought for a moment and decided to reveal Yu Xiang's past. Anything that involved the imperial family wasn't simple. Yu Xiang served the princess, so her identity had to match the princess. If the matter was exposed one day, wouldn't she be crowned with the crime of deceiving the monarch? Perhaps the situation would be even worse. If the Empress took pity on Yu Xiang and wanted to find a good husband for Yu Xiang, she would offend even more people if her identity was exposed when the imperial edict was issued. Right now, the Marquis household had lost their daughter and was the victim. At that time, the fake would become the perpetrator and drown in spittle. Even though the servant girls and mamas had been cleaned up, it was better to be safe than sorry. It wasn't wrong to think of the worst. Therefore, even if Old Lady Yu hid it from the world, she didn't dare to deceive the imperial family. As expected, the Empress was very surprised when she heard it. After a moment of silence, she sighed. There were so many twists and turns in this. The heavens really make fools of people. Then has the real Yu Xiang been found? Replying Nyang Nyang, we're still searching. Old Lady Yu shook her head and smiled bitterly. This was purely a secret of the inner residence and wasn't worth telling to outsiders. The Empress was very pleased with Old Lady Yu's honesty and loyalty, but she didn't mention the matter of searching for her. Let Marquis Yongla solve it himself. No one knew if the real Yu Xiang was alive or dead, or what her situation was like. Covering up this matter tightly would also pave some escape routes for her. She would pretend she never heard of it. Thinking of this, the Empress smiled. Don't worry. With Yi Feng's ability, he'll find her one day. She frowned and thought for a moment, then continued, Yu Xiang has been raised very well by you all. She's virtuous, intelligent, and generous. It's fine if she doesn't want to be a study companion. Send her into the palace to accompany Xiaojiu in 3 to 5 days. It's rare for her to find such a pleasant playmate. This matter was considered clear. Old Lady Yu sighed in relief and hurriedly agreed. Yu Xiang was carried out of the palace gates by Yu Pinyin. From afar, she could see Yu Xiu standing beside the carriage with her head lowered. She didn't know what she was thinking about. When Old Lady saw her, she snorted coldly. Then she saw the Duke Jingwa Fu's carriage waiting at the side and her face became gloomier. Old Madam, can we talk in private? Duchess Jingwa went forward with a smile. No need. It's getting late, everyone should return to their own homes. Old Lady didn't look sideways and personally lifted the curtain to let her grandson put her granddaughter into the carriage. Old ancestor, I'll help you. Yu Xiu obediently moved forward. Because there were outsiders present, Old Lady suppressed her anger and took her arm to board the carriage. Yu calmed down a bit and smiled fawningly at her older brother on the horse. She also quickly climbed in and obediently sat in the corner. Yu Xiang grinned at her, then lifted the curtain to admire Duchess Jinggua's alternating green and white face. Chang Yafu didn't show himself. Presumably, he was hiding in the carriage and didn't dare to see anyone. The carriage wheels slowly rolled and Duchess Jinggua's figure gradually disappeared into the night, becoming a blurry black dot. Only then did Yu Xiang calmly sit down and ask, "Old ancestor, is Big Brother really going to marry that fool Jijia? This matter is still pending. Children shouldn't ask too much." Old lady closed her eyes and muttered. The more she looked at this marriage, the more dissatisfied she was. Duke Jinggua's treachery had always been a thorn in her heart. Seeing Chang Yafu today, not only did this thorn not disappear, it stabbed even deeper. It was one thing to want to break off the marriage in the past, but today, she even colluded with outsiders to swindle her younger sister-in-law. What kind of problem was this? On the surface, she was helping Xiang'er get out of trouble, but on the inside, she wanted to curry favor with Qinghe Junju. This trick of playing the victim on both sides was really clumsy. Even worse, she was so short-sighted that she didn't know who to get close to and who to keep a distance from. The emperor's guillotine was hanging over Prince Yu's head, yet she was still trying to curry favor with him. No matter how she thought about it, it was all for naught. This kind of seemingly smart but actually stupid granddaughter-in-law would be another disaster if she brought her into the family. Thinking of this, old lady shook her head and sighed. Yu carefully moved forward to massage her shoulders. No need to trouble yourself. Go to the side. What did I tell you before we left today? Colluding with outsiders to deal with your own sister, you've grown up. Your morals are lacking. With the Empress' words, even if I wanted to find you a good husband, it would be difficult. You should take care of yourself. Old lady pushed her aside with a gloomy expression. Seeing Yu Xiang, who was minding her own business, she finally pulled out a smile and warmly warned, "After you enter the palace, you have to be good. Don't tease the 9th princess anymore." Chapter 21. After returning, the matriarch pondered for several days, but in the end, she couldn't come to a decision. She could only find her grandson to ask about his marriage with Duke Jinghua. Yu Pinyin played with his teacup, his attitude somewhat absent-minded. Old ancestor doesn't know, but grandson was young and impulsive. I once privately sought out Chang Yafu and asked her if she was willing to marry me. The matriarch leaned forward and asked, "What did she say?" She said, "Wait until I become the Marquis of Yongla before asking her." Seemingly finding these words very amusing, Yu Pinyin laughed softly. The matriarch couldn't laugh at all. Hearing such selfish and heartless words, how did her grandson feel at that time? His father had passed away, his mother was indifferent, and there was even a group of uncles who wanted to take his life in the open and in the dark. His fiancée, who was supposed to go through thick and thin with him, had coldly watched him struggle in the sea of bitterness. What kind of price did he pay to get to where he is today? The matriarch felt as if a knife was stabbing at her heart. The pain was unbearable. Old ancestor, what kind of expression is that? I'm fine. Yu Pinyin put down his teacup and patted his grandmother's slightly trembling shoulder. He said with a smile, "Now that I'm the Marquis of Yongla, there are some things I don't want to ask. Old ancestor, do as you see fit." "All right, I'll take care of this matter in less than 3 days." The matriarch nodded, her expression somewhat unkind. Who would have thought that the old Duke Jinghua would fall critically ill the next day, causing Duke Jinghua's estate to become a pot of porridge? At this time, cancelling the marriage was akin to hitting a man while he was down, so the matriarch could only restrain herself. After a few more days, the old Duke Jinghua's condition didn't get better. Instead, it became even more serious. One night, he finally breathed his last. White banners fluttered everywhere in Duke Jinggua's estate, making it even more difficult to talk about cancelling the marriage. Chang Yafu had to observe mourning for 3 years. If the marriage wasn't cancelled, her grandson would be 19 in 3 years. In other families, her great-grandson would already be able to run, jump, and shout. What a waste of effort. Old Madame Fu held her breath, but she couldn't let it out. She felt extremely uncomfortable in her heart. Turning around, she began to look for a concubine for her grandson. A few years ago, Yu Pinyin had been secretly harmed by a maidservant by his side. Later on, he was set up by his fiancée. It could be said that he hated women to the core. He casually tossed the person sent by the old lady into the courtyard and went out on an errand. He didn't return home for more than half a month. On this day, Yu Xiang woke up early. While humming a tune, she faced the bronze mirror and painted yellow flowers. Yu Xiang had a very good foundation. After several months of nourishment, her facial features had grown a little. Her appearance was becoming more and more beautiful day by day. Gradually, her appearance coincided with Yu Xiang's appearance in her previous life. This change was a good thing for her. Anyone would be horrified to see a completely unfamiliar face in the mirror. Cao Hong came in with breakfast and asked, "Miss, are you in a good mood today?" Ever since little Master Ho left, his mistress had not smiled like this. "Yes, I dreamed that my brother came back." Yu Xiang motioned for Lu to push her over to eat. She said briskly, "Today, I'll give you all a day off. Go home. By the way, Shi Qiu, who is in charge of cleaning, Nanny Rome, who is in charge of washing, and Pang Fu, who is in charge of carrying water and chopping firewood, all of you can go home. Just be back before 5 o'clock. Cao Hong didn't feel happy at all. Instead, he was worried. "Miss, if we all leave, who will take care of you?" These were the real people in the courtyard. Under the instigation of Cui Ping and Cui Shi, the rest of them all dropped their duties and hid away all day long. They only showed up when it was time to collect their monthly salary. After a few months, they became more and more unscrupulous. Even if they passed by Miss, they would pretend not to see her. They often angered Tao Hong and Lu, but Miss never took it to heart. Yu Xiang said while eating porridge, "You can push me outside later. I have my own plans for today. When you come back, this courtyard will be quiet." Tao Hong wanted to persuade her again, but Lu gently pulled him. Only then did he reluctantly agree. After breakfast, the two pushed Yu Xiang out of the courtyard. "Here, it's quite windy." Yu Xiang took off her cloak and smiled. "You can put this away. I don't need it." It was late autumn. When she breathed, she could see wisps of white fog. If she didn't wear a cloak and sat in the wind, wouldn't she get sick from the cold? Tao Hong was anxious and insisted on putting it on her. Lu already knew the inside story. She folded the cloak and put it in the room. Then she took out a medicine bottle and squatted down. "Miss, take one of these dispelling wind and cold dispelling pills first. We'll go now. Take it easy." Yu Xiang took out the pill and put it in her mouth. She pointed at her with her finger and smiled. "Don't forget to tell Mama Ma what I taught you." Because Tao Hong had everything written on his face, he didn't entrust this matter to her. On the other hand, Lu had some plans in his heart. Lu pursed her lips and nodded. Tao Hong was at a loss. The two of them pulled each other and walked away. Soon, the courtyard quieted down. Only the sound of leaves rustling in the cold wind could be heard. Yu Xiang closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. Half an hour later, she hugged her shoulders and shouted, "Someone, I'm cold. Bring me a set of clothes." Everywhere was quiet. She waited for a moment and then began to shout again. She shouted until her throat was dry, but no one responded. Cui Ping and Cui Shi were hiding in the east room. They were playing cards with a few servants and laughed as they listened to her shouting. No one is allowed to respond. Let her drink the northwest wind. Cui Ping spat out a few pieces of melon seed shells. The servants nodded. Yu Xiang's leg was broken, and she was weak and easy to bully. After a few months, they didn't treat her as their master. Instead, they felt like they were trampling on the first daughter of the Marquis family. It had to be said that bullying the weak was a bad habit that most people couldn't get rid of. Only one servant asked worriedly, "She's shouting so loudly. What if someone outside heard her? If it gets to little Master Ho, we'll be finished." It's fine, it's fine. Cui Shi waved her hand impatiently. This place is so far from the main courtyard. No one will come. Madam doesn't care about her life or death. The old lady must be doing her morning prayers in the temple. How could she have the time to care about her? It's fine. She's just a person who looks strong on the outside but is weak on the inside. She's always shouting and acting all high and mighty. Once she's bullied by us, she'll wilt. She won't dare to complain to little Master Ho. She's very afraid of me and Cui Ping. After saying this, she smiled complacently. The servant thought that it was true and continued to play cards with peace of mind. Yu Xiang continued to shout outside. She was so angry that her voice sounded like she was roaring. The two servants who were in charge of chopping firewood and carrying water for the west wing passed by and quickly ran to the window to ask Cui Ping what to do. "You guys go ahead and play. Don't worry about her. If anything happens, I'll take care of it." Cui Ping waved her hand. The two servants were used to slacking and pushing all the work to Pang Fu. Seeing that Pang Fu wasn't there, they thought that he went to carry water and didn't think much of it. After flattering Cui Ping a few times, they slipped away. Everyone continued to play cards, but the shouting outside didn't stop. It was clear that she was going against them. After half an hour, Yu Xiang's voice was so dry that it sounded like dried branches scraping the ground. However, it still didn't stop there. It was really annoying. Cui Ping threw the cards in her hand on the table and shouted, "It's so annoying. Let's go. We'll find a quiet place somewhere else and let her shout until she's satisfied." "Yes, I'll put the cards away." An old woman immediately agreed. "If we leave, what if someone comes to the courtyard later?" The little girl frowned and asked. "Little Master Ho isn't here and the old lady is doing her morning class. Who would come? You're too timid." I asked Lulu and she said that she went with Tao Hong to buy Quan Fu Ji's rice cakes for the cripple. They'll be back soon. It's already so late and they should be here soon. They'll naturally take care of the cripple. There's nothing for us to do. Let's go, let's go. Cui Shi urged. Everyone no longer hesitated and swaggered out of the courtyard in front of Yu Xiang. Cui Ping and Cui Shi walked in front of her and picked their ears. When they saw her livid face and angry eyes, they covered their mouths and giggled. After a few months of indulgence, they had already forgotten what their names were. "Come back here. Come back quickly." Amidst Yu Xiang's shouts, the group of people gradually walked away. The cold wind blew, blowing up a few withered yellow leaves. Yu Xiang's angry expression instantly disappeared and a malicious smile slowly bloomed on her lips. She whispered, "If God wants to destroy, he must first make them crazy. You who have signed a contract to sell yourselves may have forgotten that I, Yu Xiang, am essentially your God." She took out a piece of rice cake wrapped in oil paper from her sleeve and slowly tore it open to eat. The wind was very strong and constantly pulled at her skirt. Her exposed skin was cold and gradually lost its color. Half an hour passed. The sun passed through the dark clouds, sprinkling a patch of sunlight and then withdrawing it. The temperature was still as cold as ever. Two magpies landed on a branch, chirping and playing. It was exactly the same as the scene in her dream. Her heartstrings were gently plucked, telling her that the familiar person was approaching. The magpies playing on the branch should be returning home. She crumpled the oil paper into a ball and threw it far away. Then she shouted at the top of her lungs, "Someone come, I'm cold, someone come quickly." Her voice was completely hoarse and sounded like a broken bellows. Yu Pinyin finished his work a few days in advance. He dismounted from his horse and went straight to the west wing. When he was at home, he didn't feel anything, but when he was outside, he couldn't help but think of Xiang'er. He wondered what she was doing at this moment, whether she was taking medicine properly, eating properly, whether the silver charcoal he bought had been delivered to her room, whether she had changed into the thick clothes and fur coat he bought, whether she still liked them. He was running around everywhere, but his heart was always on her. But what did he see? His sister, whom he couldn't bear to touch even a single strand of her hair, was sitting in the courtyard wearing thin clothes. Her face was as white as paper, her lips were dry and chapped, and her voice was hoarse from shouting. When he wasn't here, that group of servants took care of her like this? Left her to fend for herself? That's great. A strong murderous look appeared in his dark eyes. He quickly walked over and held his sister, who had begun to cry when she saw him, in his arms. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her cold and stiff body. Then he kicked the wheelchair and quickly went back to the room. He sat down on the soft couch with Yu Xiang in his arms and ordered the two Changshui standing outside the door, "Burn a pot of charcoal and come over quickly. Find everyone in the courtyard and bring them back within 15 minutes. Brother, Tao Hong, Lu Lu, Shi Qiu, Nanny Rong and Pang Fu are all good people. I saw that they had been working hard for days, so I gave them a day off. I didn't expect that after they left, there would be no one in the courtyard." "Brother, don't give them a hard time," Yu Xiang said weakly. "I know. Don't worry." Yu Pinyin put her cold hands into his clothes and lovingly rubbed her pale lips. Yu Xiang buried her face in his chest, took a deep breath, and smiled slyly. She couldn't walk, so she didn't have the energy to control the servants who had bad intentions. After a few months of indulgence, she knew who was loyal and who was evil. She didn't want to play the trick of killing the chicken to warn the monkey. She couldn't subdue them for a while, so she might as well leave with Cui Ping and Cui Shi. No one would be lucky enough to stay. Chapter 22. When Lulu left, she said that she was worried about her master, so she asked Mama Ma to go over and help look after her. The courtyard was full of servants. How could there be no one to order after 5 of them left? Did she still need to rely on outsiders? Mama Ma was well aware of Lulu's implication. Little Master Ho didn't care about the matters of the inner residence, so he naturally didn't know that the matriarch was old and didn't have enough energy to manage everything. As the matriarch's most trusted person, she was very clear about Yu Xiang's situation. Ever since her wet nurse died, the 2 maidservants had become the masters, and she had been suppressed into a servant. Originally, she thought that since she wasn't of the Marquis household blood, she should be left to fend for herself. But now, she couldn't find a reason to do anything. The master of the household didn't even say anything, so if she went over, wouldn't it be obvious that she had overstepped her boundaries? Moreover, the current Yu Xiang was very opinionated, so she probably already had a plan in mind. Mama Ma was just waiting for her to make a move. Today, after receiving Lulu's instructions, she immediately reacted. The second young miss wanted to find a reason to get rid of all those servants. Alright, this time, whoever slacked off and couldn't find anyone would immediately get out of the Marquis household. She stepped into the small courtyard with a solemn expression and saw Master Ho's Changshui, Zhang Quan, moving a brazier into the room. She couldn't help but be shocked. "Aya, Master Ho is back." Zhang Quan made a shushing gesture and pointed inside the room. Well, she thought that these servants were going to have bad luck today, but she didn't expect that they would have bad luck. Unfortunately, little Master Ho, who had returned home early, bumped into them. She tidied up her messy hair that had been blown by the wind and obediently went in. She saw little Master Ho sitting on the soft couch with the crying miss in his arms. He used a large cloak to wrap the miss tightly, only revealing her small face. He wiped her tears and carefully fed her medicine. His eyes were soft, but his tense face indicated that a storm was coming. This servant greets little Master Ho. Mama Ma bowed with trepidation. What are you doing here? Yu Pinion's deep voice was now filled with ice. I'm worried, so I came to check on Mississippi. Hearing this, Yu Pinion's expression softened a little. He glanced at her and said, You're considerate. Wait at the side. I'll have to trouble you to deal with a group of slaves later. Mama Ma repeatedly said, Of course, of course. She quickly shrank into the corner and pretended to be a wooden dummy. Yu Xiang's body gradually warmed up. She put her hands in her brother's lapels and felt his strong and broad chest muscles. She couldn't help but touch them. When her brother looked down, she blinked innocently at him. Her tears were like pearls from a broken necklace. Why are you crying? Look at how useless you are. Even Yu Xiu is better than you. Yu Pinion scolded her, but his actions were very gentle. He took her little hand out of her pocket and placed it by his lips to breathe. He was tired from the long journey and had grown some stubble, which was quite annoying. Yu Xiang couldn't help but want to laugh. She hurriedly threw herself into his embrace to cover it up. Yu Pinion thought that she had been wronged. He opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't say anything. The charcoal fire crackled and burned, baking the room as if it was spring. The servants that Chang Sui brought back felt as if they had walked into an ice cellar. One by one, they shrunk their necks and shivered. They never would have thought that Master Ho would come back today. What should he do now? Cui Ping and Cui Shi were already sobbing. From time to time, they would raise their heads and look pitifully at little Master Ho. Yu Pinion was focused on playing with his little sister's meaty little hand. His fingertips poked the little dimples on the back of her hand. He seemed to be addicted to it. His other hand held a handkerchief and carefully wiped away her tears. The room was quiet and the cold atmosphere was suffocating. After about a quarter of an hour, he finally asked, Where did you find them? What are they doing? Replying to Master Ho, these people were found in the side room of the east courtyard. They are playing cards. These people are sunbathing in the back garden and eating melon seeds. This one is sleeping in her room. This one is eating in the kitchen. There are still 5 people who are missing. This servant has already sent people to investigate. Chang Sui pointed them out one by one. You don't need to care about those 5. Yu Pinion waved his hand. His gaze was as sharp as a knife as it scraped across these people. Everyone began to tremble. They felt a wave of coldness seep into their scalps and freeze their souls. They wanted to loudly beg for mercy. They wanted to kowtow and weep. They wanted to turn around and run away. However, their bodies seemed to be filled with lead and their throats seemed to be filled with burning coal. They couldn't move or make a sound. They still remembered the time when the 3rd branch wanted to hang themselves in front of the Marquis household. Master Ho had looked at them with the same gaze. He had watched until the 3rd branch's family didn't even dare to have thoughts of suicide. Now that they had fallen into Master Ho's hands, would they be able to keep their lives? That's right, Miss has a soft personality. They could beg Miss. Many people raised their heads to look at Yu Xiang. Their eyes were filled with hope. Yu Xiang buried her face in her brother's chest. Look at them. Yu Pinion didn't allow it. He grabbed her chin and turned her face around. His tone was very strict. Look at them. You're not allowed to look away. Take this. He took off the horsewhip from his waist and stuffed it into his sister's hand. Yu Xiang was a bit confused. Why did he give her a horsewhip? To whip them. His calm voice carried a strong killing intent. Yu Xiang stared blankly. Was it really okay to let a 10-year-old little girl learn how to use a whip to whip people? Shouldn't you be in charge of this matter? Shouldn't you give them a beating and then chase them out? Wouldn't you be teaching them the wrong way now? Yu Xiang was so excited that her hands were trembling. She hurriedly closed her eyes to hide her overly bright gaze. Yu Pinyin thought that she was afraid. He grabbed her hand that was holding the whip and pressed his lips close to her ear. He said word by word, "Whip them. If anyone disrespects you in the future, pick up the whip and whip them. Whoever has a whip mark on their body will be immediately sold off with 50 beatings. Even though your leg is broken, you're not a cripple. You're Yu Pinyin's little sister. You should be proud, unbridled, and live with your head held high. Do you understand? Raise your hand and whip them." Yu Xiang quickly glanced at him. After a moment, she raised her hand and whipped Cui Shi's face, leaving a faint red mark. Cui Shi immediately burst into tears and begged, "Miss, please spare my life. Master Ho, please spare my life. This servant won't dare to do it again." "Shut up." Yu Pinyin glanced at her indifferently. He then looked at his little sister and reprimanded, "Use more strength. Think about how they treated you. I, Yu Pinyin, don't need a weak little sister who can be bullied. If I wasn't by your side, would you have been tortured to death by the servants?" Yu Xiang pursed her lips and turned to Cui Ping and whipped her. Cui Ping covered her face and screamed. Bright red blood flowed out from between her fingers. Her face was disfigured. Yu Pinyin finally smiled. He rubbed his little sister's head and praised, "Very good. That's how it is. Continue whipping." Mama Ma swallowed her saliva. She lowered her head and thought, "Little Master Ho is teaching Miss like this. Isn't it a bit inappropriate? If she whipped everyone she saw, her reputation would spread." She then shook her head and sighed, "Miss is already like this. What does it matter if her reputation is good or bad? She should be tougher. Otherwise, she will only be bullied in the future." Yu Xiang whipped Cui Ping until she cried out in joy. The anger buried in her heart finally erupted. Every time she whipped, she would scold, "Who asked you to be greedy for my monthly allowance? Who asked you to steal from my private store? Who asked you to steal my things? Who asked you to serve me in front of Gij and trample on me behind Gij's back? Who asked you to call me master in public and call me dead cripple in secret? Who asked you to?" Yu Pinyin's originally relaxed brows turned gloomy as she narrated. He held her wrist and gently said, "All right, Xianger." He gently carried her to the side and tidied up her messy hair. He then caressed her red lips and smiled gently, "Rest for a while. Gij will do it." When he didn't know, this group of people actually took care of his little sister like this. It was really great. He laughed lowly and swung his hand, causing Cui Ping to fall to the ground. There was a long tear in her cotton long autumn dress. Blood splattered everywhere and stuck to the people's faces, bodies, and the floor. A strong smell of blood filled the room. Cui Ping's mournful scream shook off some of the dust on the roof. Cui Shi was dumbstruck as she looked at this scene. A smelly liquid slowly seeped out of her skirt. Just as she was about to kowtow and beg for mercy, she was also whipped out in the next moment. Yu Pinyin was very handsome. He had a tall nose, sword-like eyebrows, long and narrow phoenix eyes, and beautifully shaped thin lips. If he wasn't angry, he would be able to match the praise, a stranger like a jade, a peerless young master. He naturally had a noble temperament that was free from the mortal world. However, once he was enraged, his lofty aura turned into ferocious violence in the blink of an eye. Miserable howls rang out one after another in the room, and the smell of blood grew thicker. After half an hour, he suppressed the blood in his eyes and turned to look at his sister. "Are you afraid?" Yuxiang shook her head in a daze. Like a snowy mountain melting and flowers blooming in spring, Yu Pinyan's murderous aura instantly disappeared and was replaced by endless gentleness. He slowly walked over and looked at his little sister's clear eyes. Other than worship, there seemed to be some kind of burning emotion in the depths of her eyes. He still couldn't understand it, but he only needed to know that his little sister wasn't afraid of the real him. Yuxiang threw herself into his arms and tightly hugged his neck. Her voice trembled, "Brother, are you my real brother? Once upon a time, there was also someone who told her, 'You're my little sister, so you should be proud, unbridled, and live with your head held high.' However, she accidentally lost that person. If she found him again this time, then they would be together forever. If I live, then you also live well. If I die, then you have to accompany me to heaven or hell." Her dark red lips bloomed into a strange but gentle smile. Yu Pinyan patted her back and gently reprimanded, "What nonsense are you saying? If I'm not your real brother, then who am I?" It didn't matter whether they were related by blood or not. He had already decided that she was his real sister, so who would dare to object? Yuxiang smiled but didn't say anything. It wasn't until this moment that she truly took the youth into her heart. Mama Ma ordered people to drag the dying servants out and report them to the matriarch. The matriarch rewarded each person with 30 strikes of the cane and then called for the slave trader to sell the entire family. Marquis Yongle couldn't afford to raise such a savage slave. Chapter 23. Aside from Tao Hong, Lu Lu, and a few other servants in the courtyard, Yu Pinyan replaced all of them. He handed the indenture contracts to Yuxiang and told her to take good care of them. Yuxiang loved to stick to Yu Pinyan even more than before. She wanted to see him for 3 meals a day. If she didn't see him, she wouldn't be able to eat or sleep well. Her temper became more and more disagreeable. Yu Pinyan did his best to satisfy all of his younger sister's requests. If there was anything good, he would just send it to her room. His wisdom had matured long ago, and he had experienced many hardships. His heart had long been refined into a 1,000-year-old cold iron under countless schemes and power struggles. There were so many people in the Fu. In the past, he only valued the old madam. Now, he had added Yuxiang. Yu Siyu, the Lin clan, and his younger sister who lived outside were all considered outsiders. The outside world's evaluation of Yu Pinyan as ruthless and cold-blooded was based on facts. But no matter how the outside world criticized him, Yuxiang liked this kind of Yu Pinyan. She liked him very much. Whenever she had nothing to do, she would take out the horsewhip he gave her and gently wave it while smiling with squinted eyes. Today, afternoon, Yu Pinyan still hadn't returned. She was really anxious. She used the horsewhip to hit the table and shouted, "Tao Hong, go to the front courtyard and see if my older brother has returned." "Yes, this servant will go right away." Tao Hong agreed outside the courtyard. He had just walked a few steps when he saw Mama Ma running over with an anxious expression. She panted heavily and said, "Tao Hong, Lu Lu, quickly push your master to the main courtyard. The old lady has an urgent matter. Hurry, hurry, hurry." Mama Ma had always been steady. This was the first time Tao Hong had seen her so anxious. He agreed while running into the room and pushing out his impatient master. "What's going on?" Yuxiang felt more and more anxious. "Miss, you have to persuade Master Ho." Mama Ma felt that Lulu was too weak, so she pushed her away and pushed the wheelchair herself. She explained in a low voice, "I don't know what's wrong with Master Ho, but he said that he wants to join the army. Tonight, he will pack up his things and live in the Agile Cavalry Battalion." That was the Agile Cavalry Battalion, the agile cavalry battalion that was always at the forefront of every battle. The old Master Ho was once the great general of light cavalry. In the end, he died on the battlefield and ended up being a corpse wrapped in horse hide. It was said that at the beginning of spring next year, the emperor would go on a punitive expedition against Prince Yu. Master Ho was preparing to go to the northwest. Miss, Master Ho listens to you the most. You must stop him. Yu Xiang's face darkened when he heard this. He didn't reply, nor did he nod. All he did was grip his horse whip tightly. As soon as he entered, he saw the old lady clutching her chest with one hand and pointing at the expressionless Yu Pinyin with the other, her lips trembling. She was so angry that she couldn't speak. When she saw Yu Xiang, she immediately shouted, "Xianger, you came just in time. Quickly persuade your brother." Of all the things he could do, he chose to join the army. Does he think that fighting is fun? Yu Pinyin finally couldn't hold it in any longer. He frowned and said, "Old ancestor, why did you call Xianger over? She's still young. There's no need for her to know about these things. Why can't I know?" Yu Xiang had Mama Ma push him to Yu Pinyin's side and tightly held his arm. "You're not allowed to go. If you go, what will old ancestor and I do?" Before her voice fell, tears poured out. Yu Pinyin couldn't bear to see her cry. He pulled her out of the wheelchair and sat her on his lap. He carefully wiped her tears and waited for her to calm down a bit before saying softly, "If I entered the government as a Hanlin Academy attendant, 3 years to become a minister of the Office of Transmission, 5 years to become a cabinet scholar attendant, 10 years to become a deputy minister of the Office of Transmission, and 3 years to become a minister of the Office of Transmission. In total, I would need at least 21 years to climb to the third-rank position. 21 years later, you would be 31 years old, and I wouldn't be able to protect you. I also wouldn't be able to restore the Marquis household to the glory of grandfather. I'm unwilling." The old lady's hands stopped shaking. She closed her eyes and twirled her prayer beads. When she heard the last sentence, she paused for a moment. "But you're already the Marquis of Yongla." Yu Xiang sniffled. "Silly girl, a title is different from an official position. No matter how high a title is, without real power, you'll still be trampled on." Yu Pinyin blew her nose and continued, "A goal that can't be achieved in 21 years, I only need to go to the battlefield a few times. Xiang, I want you and old ancestor to live better than now." A mere commandery princess of Qinghe could bully him. This was not the life he wanted. With a flip of his hand, he could summon clouds and rain with a flip of his hand, making it so that no one could casually trample on him or his family. The humiliation he endured when he was young, and every step he took was filled with trepidation. It was all for the sake of standing at a higher peak and looking at the scenery further away. 21 years, how many 21 years could there be in a person's life? He couldn't wait, old ancestor couldn't wait, and Xiang, couldn't wait either. Thinking of this, his gentle eyes slowly became firm. The old lady opened her eyes and glanced at him, then closed them again. The prayer beads in her hands twirled quickly. A good man had ambitions. She always knew that her grandson was a man among men. He was even more outstanding than his brave and skilled grandfather. If he made up his mind, no one could stop him. Yu Xiang knew Yu Pinyin as well as the old lady. She saw the ambition in the young man's dark eyes and only felt a sense of defeat. This person was an eagle that wanted to spread its wings and soar, not a parrot tied to a golden frame for amusement. If she continued to dissuade him, she would only disappoint and disgust him. She closed her eyes and knew that this matter was a foregone conclusion. She said word by word, "Brother, if you have an accident on the battlefield, have you thought about what will happen to old ancestor and me? Although those uncles have been frightened by you, they still have hatred in their hearts. When the time comes, won't they swarm us and swallow us whole? Old ancestor is old and can't take any provocation. I can't walk properly and can't help. You are our backbone. Without you, we can't survive. The old lady felt her heart and the corners of her eyes became slightly wet. When she thought that her granddaughter was going to persuade her grandson with emotion, she changed the topic and said firmly, "So you must come back alive. If something happens to you, I will die with you. In any case, I'm a cripple. There's no meaning in living in this world." As she said this, she actually smiled, but more tears welled up in her eyes. Yu Pinyin pulled her into his arms and was silent for a long time before he said hoarsely, "Don't worry. Brother will definitely come back safely. Don't talk about death or life again in the future." "Okay, I won't talk about it anymore." Yu Xiang smeared her tears on his lapel and then moved back slightly. She used the horsewhip to lightly whip his arm and said angrily, "You came to tell old ancestor and me after you made your decision. Who told you to act on your own and be disobedient?" After whipping him twice, she threw herself into his arms and wiped her tears. Her intention to take revenge was very obvious. The horsewhip didn't hit his body, but his heart, leaving a trace that couldn't be erased. There was some pain, some touching, and a lot of joy. Yu Pinyin's sadness disappeared in an instant. He hugged his sister and rubbed her. He didn't mind that she was dirty and used his fingertips to wipe away her tears and snot. Then he took the horsewhip from her hand and handed it to the matriarch. "Old ancestor, please whip your grandson a few times too. It's your grandson's fault for not being able to stay by your side." The matriarch's heart had already softened, but she didn't show it on her face. She took the horsewhip and really whipped it a few times. It sounded very loud, but in fact, it hit the surface of his clothes like scratching an itch. She only stopped when she saw her grandson frown and pretend to be in pain. She said unhappily, "Okay, stop pretending. Quickly go back and pack your things. Remember, you must come back safely." Yu Pinyin nodded. He picked up Yu Xiang and was about to leave. Just as he stepped out of the door, he heard the matriarch reluctantly add, "Go and see your mother. Although she doesn't know how to act, her status is still there. Don't let others have something to say." Yu Pinyin nodded in silence. He walked to the fork in the road and looked at his sister in his arms. "Xiang, are you going to see mother? She doesn't want to see me, and I don't want to see her. It's better if we don't have anything to do with each other. Older brother, you can go by yourself." Yu Xiang refused without hesitation. In her previous life, she didn't have extravagant hopes for a mother's love. In this life, she wouldn't have the slightest bit of hope. The Lin clan was nothing more than a stranger to her. Even if she found the parents of this body in the future, she might not be able to feel any kinship with them. These words were somewhat rebellious and extremely cold. However, Yu Pinyin seemed to have heard something interesting and laughed quietly. He put her in the wheelchair and rubbed her head. He stood in place and watched her leave before he walked back to the main room. How could Yu Xiang not be his blood-related sister? Her temperament was clearly the same as his. They were both direct and efficient, had the same clear distinction between love and hate, and also didn't recognize her own family. No, it wasn't that she didn't recognize her own family. It was just that there were too few people who could gain her approval. In the entire Fu, other than himself, she probably didn't even care about the matriarch. Her temperament was too cold. Although he thought this, Yu Pinyin didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Instead, he felt a subtle sense of satisfaction. Because Mama Ma had burned a lot of things last time, the Lin clan's room was much more spacious. However, the light was still dim and the smell of candles and fragrant oil floated in the air. It wasn't a bad smell, but it made people feel oppressed for no reason. In the middle of the hall, the memorial tablet of the late Marquis Yongle, Junjieyu, was placed on the table. Because it had been rubbed by people all year round, it was very smooth. The two words, deceased husband, were still as dark red as before. It was as if they had been redrawn with cinnabar many times. Yu Pinyin only glanced at it once before turning his head away and staring at the ground. The Lin clan was focused on flipping through a stack of paper. The smile at the corner of her mouth was a bit absent-minded. Presumably, she was immersed in the sweet memories of the past and was unable to extricate herself. After Yu Pinyin's voice fell for a while, she seemed to wake up from a dream. She lightly waved her hand and said, "Go. Take good care of yourself." As expected, this was her reaction. Yu Pinyin's eyes were slightly cold. When he thought of Xiang's crying face and the old ancestor's anxious and furious expression, he smiled unconcernedly. Whatever, he would protect the people he cared about. He couldn't care less about the other miscellaneous things. There was nothing else to say. Yu Pinyin got up and left. However, he was unexpectedly stopped by the Lin clan. "Did you find your sister? Why hasn't there been any news after half a year? Did you use your heart or not?" With his back to the Lin clan, Yu Pinyin's handsome face was covered in a layer of frost. He said in a low voice, "Your son naturally used his heart. However, the sea of people is vast. How could it be that easy to search through the great Han Empire in a few months? Mother, don't be impatient. As long as she's still alive, we'll find her one day." Chapter 24. Yu Pinyin went to the military camp and only returned home once every half a month. This made Yu Xiang very anxious, and she had no choice but to take out a few Buddhist scriptures to recite. She was a person with wisdom but a worldly heart. She had fallen into the same Avicii hell for 2 lifetimes but had never thought of breaking free. Instead, she sank deeper and deeper. Today, after finishing her morning classes, a palace official personally came to take her to see the 9th princess. It was the most relaxing and pleasant to interact with innocent children. Yu Xiang suppressed her thoughts and sat in the carriage. Even though the 9th princess was already 8 years old, she still lived with the empress and occupied a large courtyard on the west side of Changle Palace. Yu Xiang paid her respects to the empress and was carried in by 2 old mamas in her wheelchair. The 9th princess' study companion had already been found. It was the youngest daughter of the country's general, Fan Jiaojiao. Even though the name sounded nice, she was a simple-minded little tigress. She had a very straightforward personality and couldn't understand even the slightest twist in her words. Even though she had just turned 7 years old, she was taller than Yu Xiang. In addition, she had dark skin and big bright eyes. When she glared at people, she had a bit of an aura. Of course, this kind of paper tiger could only scare ordinary children. Yu Xiang was not afraid. The first time she came, she made this little girl obedient. In her heart, she sighed at the empress's judgment of people. Even though finding a silly one was to prevent her from being controlled by her study companion, she couldn't find such a silly one, right? The 2 of them together could only form 4 words, Tian Can and D Quebec. At this time, Tian Can and DK saw her as if they saw a piece of meat and bones. They bounced over and pulled her hand towards the soft couch. The 2 mamas hurriedly pushed the wheelchair forward and took off Yu Xiang's shoes to carry her up. The 3 of them chatted for a while. The 9th princess looked around and saw that the palace servants all had their heads lowered. Then she took out a wooden box from behind her pillow, opened the lid, and put it under Yu Xiang's eyes. She whispered, "For you. This is called Shui Ling Long. It's delicious." Yu Xiang took a closer look and saw that there were 2 donkeys rolling around with a layer of white sugar sprinkled on the outside. They were round and pink and looked very cute. Yu Xiang picked one up and put it into his mouth to chew, then glanced at Tigress, who was secretly swallowing her saliva with amusement. "Is it good?" the 9th princess asked expectantly. "Delicious. When Yuxiang bit into the soft skin, a fragrant red bean juice immediately flowed out. It was too sweet for other people, but it was just right for Yuxiang. Just like the ninth princess, she was also a sweet girl. The ninth princess smiled in satisfaction. I knew you would like it. I exchanged this with a bag of gemstones. There were originally 6 of them. I ate 2, Jiao Jiao ate 2, and left 2 for you. Yuxiang was in the middle of swallowing and almost choked to death when he heard this. He hurriedly waved at the palace servant standing at the side and rolled his eyes. What kind of stuffed donkey rolling around was actually worth a bag of gemstones? The palace servants hurriedly brought over a cup of water and fed it to her. Mama Kim, who had raised the ninth princess's breasts, stepped forward and patted her back. However, her mind was still pondering over the words just now. Who was so daring to actually use a few donkey rolling around to trick the ninth princess? Because the princesses were not allowed to have palace servants accompany them during class and were only allowed to bring along study companions, if the ninth princess didn't say anything about what happened in the academy, Mama Kim wouldn't know. Yuxiang stretched his neck and finally swallowed the donkey rolling around into his stomach. He hurriedly asked, "You really used a bag of gemstones to exchange for 6 donkey rolling around?" The ninth princess blinked her large eyes, looking extremely innocent. Yuxiang covered his face and groaned. He then took out a fingernail-sized piece of silver from his embroidered pouch and said, "Do you see this? This little bit of silver can buy 50 Xueling long. Moreover, this isn't even called Xueling long, it's called donkey rolling around. In the outside world, this is a snack that can be seen everywhere and the price is very low. Silly girl, you've been cheated." She looked towards Tigress and asked, "Could it be that you've never seen this thing before?" Tigress carefully shook her head. She was so big, yet she insisted on hiding behind the ninth princess. Hiding her head and revealing her tail, she looked very comical. Speaking of which, it was also strange. She wasn't afraid of the ninth princess, but was instead afraid of Yuxiang, who she only saw once every 3 to 5 days. This child looked rough, but was also born in a big family. Normally, she was pampered, so how could she eat something like donkey rolling around? Yuxiang helplessly face-bombed and asked, "Who exchanged it with you?" "It's 7th princess study partner, Deng Kaiming." Tigress timidly stuck out half of her head. The ninth princess's reaction was slow, and only now did she realize that she was at a disadvantage. She pursed her lips and asked, "How much snow can a bag of gemstones be exchanged for, that donkey rolling around?" "So much that you can bury yourself. You won't be able to finish it in your lifetime." Yuxiang lightly tapped her forehead, somewhat exasperated that she didn't live up to expectations. "What exchange? You're the princess, and she's little Zhao's study partner. If you like her pastries, just take them." "Why should you give her gemstones?" She refused. The ninth princess felt quite wronged. If she refused, then whip her. You have the world's most powerful father, the world's most powerful mother, and the world's most powerful brother. What can't you get? Next time you see her, whip her fiercely. The ninth princess wants to eat her pastries, but she still makes excuses. She doesn't know how to appreciate kindness. She was so agitated that a few vulgarities popped out of her mouth. Yuxiang awkwardly touched her lips. Seeing that the 2 children didn't understand and were looking at her with admiration, she naturally put her hand down. Mama Kim covered her mouth to hold back her laughter. The ninth princess pondered for a moment, then shook her head awkwardly. "That's not good. She'll be as annoying as that Commandery Princess Qinghe." "How can that be the same? Commandery Princess Qinghe snatched you. That's called presumptuous, overstepping the rules, and offending her superiors. You snatched someone else's, that's called bestowing, giving her face, and giving her face. You're the princess, and she's a study partner. How can it be the same? Yu Xiang instilled the law of the jungle into the child's head. As for how to defeat the strong with the weak and play the pig to eat the tiger, even if she taught for 10,000 years, this child probably wouldn't be able to learn it. Although Fan Jiaojiao was a tiger girl from a general's family, she was also a simple-minded person. She stammered, "If I whip them as soon as I go up, teacher will scold me." Silly. Just find a reason. Yu Xiang tapped the space between her eyebrows. How do we find a reason? The two children asked shamelessly. Yu Xiang was about to start teaching them the art of thick black, but glanced at Mama Kim standing by the bed, and hesitated. It didn't seem good to dye two pure white children into briquettes, right? Her Majesty the Empress found Hunyo to be a study partner. Wasn't it because she was afraid that the little ball would learn bad things? With this thought, she immediately suppressed all her schemes and said, "Finding a reason is a technical job. You're still young and can't do it. Forget it, just ignore her next time. My brother hasn't been home recently, and I have to go back to accompany the ancestor to recite scriptures. I'll leave now." She had only left home for a short while, but she was already very flustered. This wasn't a good sign. The two children reluctantly sent her to the door. Yu Xiang's eyes turned, and she waved at the ninth princess. "When you accompany Her Majesty the Empress for dinner later, remember to ask her for a box of jewelry." "Why?" The ninth princess tilted her head. "Just tell Her Majesty that you still want to exchange for some donkey rolls to eat tomorrow. Got it?" After thinking it over, the method of tattling was still the most suitable for the little ball. Got it. As long as the ninth princess promised something, she would definitely do it, unlike others who were full of tricks. Only then did Yu Xiang relax, and she waved goodbye to the two. Mama Kim was very enthusiastic this time. She personally sent her to the palace gates, and didn't forget to ask when she would come again. In the side hall of Yongla Palace, the Emperor, Empress, and the ninth princess were currently eating dinner. The ninth princess tasted good at everything she ate, and she didn't forget to give good things to Fu Huang and Empress. Her innocent childish words made the two of them chuckle. After eating until she was about 70% full, the ninth princess rinsed her mouth with green tea, and then looked eagerly at the Empress. "Muhu, can you give me a box of jewelry? Didn't I just give you a box yesterday?" The Empress pinched her nose. "The lotus seed cake told me to exchange for donkey rolls to eat." The ninth princess honestly confessed. Mama Kim, who was standing behind her, had a very subtle expression. If Yu Xiang was here, he probably would have already knelt to the ninth princess. The Empress's eyes were slightly cold, and even the Emperor turned to look, asking in a low voice, "Who is the lotus seed cake? He actually told you to exchange a box of jewelry for donkey rolls to eat. Is this donkey rolls filled with dragon liver or phoenix marrow?" Even though donkey rolls were a street snack, it was still considered a famous dish in the capital. The Emperor and Empress had eaten a lot of it when they were dressed in white, and knew that they could buy a large bag of it for 4 or 5 copper coins. The Emperor sat on top of the world, and hated it when people offended his authority the most. There was no difference between deceiving his daughter and deceiving him. The Empress said indifferently, "The lotus seed cake is Yi Feng's younger sister, the sister who lost her legs to save him. How could it be her?" The Emperor frowned, slightly surprised. He had long heard about how Yu Xiang risked her life to save her brother, and his impression of her was originally very good. Seeing that Yu Xiang was about to be tricked to death by her master, Mama Kim finally couldn't hold back. She knelt by the table and respectfully said, "This servant dares to interrupt, but the situation is like this." She recounted the conversation between the children, omitting only Yu Xiang's vulgar words. The Emperor and the Empress were suddenly enlightened. As they listened, they couldn't help laughing, especially the two parts of "the most powerful parents in the world" and "different from Commandery Princess Qinghe." The emperor clapped his hands and laughed, repeatedly saying good. The empress was slightly more reserved, but also laughed until tears came to her eyes. So that's how it is, but we misunderstood. The emperor used his fingertip to point at the confused ninth princess and scolded, "You silly girl, how can you be so greedy?" The lotus seed cake is right. If you like anything in the future, just take it. No matter how arrogant and despotic my daughter is, it's not too much. The ninth princess didn't understand, but nodded seriously. The emperor couldn't help but poke her again, and then he pulled her into his arms and rubbed her. His little was the most pure and simple, so he couldn't stop worrying about her. He had so many children, but in reality, the youngest was his treasure. Even the crown prince, who he had personally raised, had to take a step back. The ninth princess rubbed against her father's chest longingly. The emperor pinched her fleshy cheeks as he looked at the empress and complained, "Jean thinks this lotus seed cake is very good. You picked it here and there, but you chose Fan de Bao's girl. With the two of them together, won't they be fooled? It's not a big deal that her legs are inconvenient." The empress sighed helplessly. It was who chose Fan Jiaojiao, so Qinxia can't do anything. Qinxia also liked that girl, but who knew that there was a problem with her birth? Then she told the emperor about Yuxiang's birth. "It's really strange that you can carry your own child by mistake." The emperor raised an eyebrow. The empress smiled. The two families are squeezed into a cave, and they are giving birth at the same time. In addition, the moon is dark and the wind is strong, and bandits are rampant. It's hard to avoid a mistake. I don't know when that child will be found, and it's hard to say if it can be hidden. Qinxia thought about it and decided not to. The emperor waved his hand disapprovingly. "I think this child is very good. Smart, cunning, and straightforward. She doesn't beat around the bush, so I can be at ease with her by Chiu's side. What does her birth have to do with it? Whoever Zhen wants to be noble, they will be superior. Whoever Zhen wants to be humble, they will be as low as dust. It's all up to Zhen's thoughts. She's very good, so let her enter the palace to accompany Zhen's study, so that Zhen's ball won't always be fooled by others. Moreover, Yifeng will be going to war in a few days. Elevating his little sister will calm his heart." Chapter 25. The emperor carefully questioned Mama Kim and found out that the person who had used the donkey rolls to trick the ninth princess was Deng Zhaoyi's niece, Deng Kaiming. She was now the seventh princess study companion. Although this matter was not serious, it reflected Deng Kaiming's daring and greedy nature. This kind of low character was what the emperor disliked the most. Because Deng Zhaoyi had given birth to the third prince, he was now in court and had done a few good jobs. The emperor was very satisfied and wanted to use the Empress Dowager's birthday to raise her position. The birth mother of a prince, she should be promoted to a concubine to sound better. However, after this matter, the emperor cleanly removed Deng Zhaoyi's name from the promotion list. It was clearly not the first time Deng Kaiming had tricked little Jiu. It was impossible for the seventh princess not to know. Not only did she not stop it, she watched from the side. Did Deng Kaiming take Jiu's things and give them to her? The two of them played with Jiu's jewelry while laughing at her for being stupid. Did they have any respect for seniority? Did they have any sisterly affection? As a princess, how could her eyelids be this shallow? The emperor's imagination could not stop, and he was disgusted with Deng Zhaoyi's poor upbringing. He ordered someone to send a box of jewelry to her palace, saying that he also wanted to try some donkey rolls. Deng Zhaoyi could not make sense of it, but when she saw her daughter's pale face, she felt something. She grabbed her and interrogated her for a long time. In the end, she was so angry that her beautiful face became distorted. At the most critical moment of the promotion, this matter had happened. Not only was she unlucky, but her son's position in the emperor's heart had also dropped. These two disappointing things, they couldn't do anything right. Early the next morning, Deng Kaiming was sent out of the palace by two old mamas and told to never come back in this life. After everything was taken care of, the empress took out the newly released promotion list and read it. The third prince was very capable and shrewd. Recently, he had been in the limelight at court. It was said that a mother's status depended on her son. The emperor giving Deng Jiaoyi a title to promote the third prince was within the empress' expectations. This mother and son pair was a huge threat to the Eastern Palace. She was thinking of a way to deal with them, but she didn't expect the enemy to fall because of a few donkey rolls and fall right at the door. Thinking of this, the empress smiled unkindly and sighed to her confidant mamas, "Yu Xiang is really a good person. She should have been brought into the palace to accompany Jiu a long time ago." The nanny echoed in agreement. Yu Xiang didn't know that her action of teaching Jiu to complain had caused a storm in the palace. After returning home, she went straight to the old lady's courtyard and accompanied her to recite scriptures. Both the empress and the empress and empress, the empress, the empress, the empress, the empress. Eating, drinking, and having fun together would not develop feelings for each other, but overcoming difficulties together would allow them to quickly understand each other. Empress, the empress, empress empress, and empress, the empress. Empress empress, imam empress, she. You're back. Did Big Brother send any messages today? Yu Xiang asked. No. The old lady shook her head and sighed. Yu Xiang's expectant expression immediately collapsed. She had Tao Hong and Lu Lu carry her to the praying mat. She assumed a kneeling posture, took out a rusty ancient coin from her purse, clasped it in her palm, and began to chant sutras. Why are you holding a copper coin? The old lady glanced at her strangely. The ancient coin can drive away evil spirits and avoid disaster. I will take it and recite the Great Nirvana Sutra for 49 days. Then I will let Big Brother carry it with him to the northwest. The miraculous pills that Dr. Piao gave me were all taken away by my brother. Yu Xiang explained in a low voice. The old lady was very gratified. She took off her 5 fortune pouch and handed it over. After you've finished reciting the sutra, keep the copper coins inside. Later on, when someone delivers the medicine, bring it along with them. There's nothing we can do to help him, so let's just pray for more blessings. Yu Xiang nodded seriously. Yu Pinyin left very suddenly. It was just the beginning of spring, so he didn't have time to go home. Yu Xiang and the old lady could only hide behind the door. While listening to the sound of the army's horses, they wiped their tears. The Lin clan didn't even show their faces. They didn't send anyone to send any letters or gifts. It was as if they didn't have a son. The old lady was already sad. Seeing her so heartless, she couldn't help but fly into a rage. She personally ran to her courtyard and burned all of her son's belongings. If it wasn't for the fact that she still had a bit of reason, she might have even burned her son's memorial tablet. The Lin clan knelt in front of the main courtyard and cried all night. Yu Xiang wore a thick cloak and watched for half the night. In the second half of the night, she had many dreams. Her dreams were filled with Yu Pinyin's figure. His ancestors had died on the battlefield. Yu Pinyin was well aware of the cruelty of war, but he never thought it would be this cruel. It was completely different from the intrigues of the imperial court. Here, there was only blood and fire, life and death, the glint of a blade and the shadow of a sword. The sky and the earth were crimson red. Even the sunlight was dyed red. No, perhaps it was because of the blood flowing from his forehead into his eyes. Yu Pinyin was distracted by his thoughts as he neatly harvested lives. The enemy's leader was approaching. 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He raised his butcher's knife at the people who were shocked by his sudden appearance. As the blade embedded itself into the flesh, he seemed to hear someone shouting in his ear, "Brother, dodge." The head fell off from the neck. Blood gushed out from the wound and splashed everywhere. Upinian turned his horse around and saw an arrow whizzing towards him at an incredible speed, carrying a strong gust of wind with it. He only had time to move slightly to the left before he felt a sharp pain in his chest. The general has been hit by an arrow. Protect the general. Quick! Several soldiers shouted loudly and ran in his direction. One of the enemy soldiers who tried to sneak attack him was cut down by a soldier who rushed over in time. The general's armor was covered in blood. He was still lying on the ground, his life or death unknown. The powerful sleeve crossbow arrow could even penetrate iron plates. It was easy for it to penetrate a piece of breastplate. Someone went forward to help the general up, but didn't dare to pull out the arrow in his chest. Other than the sour feeling of losing a comrade, there was also the smell of blood that couldn't be washed away. Death was a daily occurrence. Why are you crying? I won't die. Upinian pushed away the soldier who was supporting him. He stood up shakily and raised his hand to pull out the arrow in his chest. General, are you all right? The soldier was so surprised that he was incoherent. Upinian took out a copper coin that was deformed by the arrow from his pocket. When he spoke, the murderous intent in his eyes disappeared. I'm fine. This coin saved me. Get on the horse and continue to kill the enemy. He jumped onto the horse's back and continued to rush forward. At this moment, the blood between heaven and earth faded. The fear and bewilderment that was buried in the bottom of his heart turned into a strong desire to return alive. He had to live. Only the people he loved could live. Everyone who stood in his way had to die. This was war. It had nothing to do with benevolence, righteousness, or morality. It was only about life and death. The soldiers were very excited. They shouted as they killed their way to the enemy camp. Many vultures followed the smell of blood and flesh and flew over. They covered the scorching sun above their heads and let out hair-raising screeches from time to time. The sky and earth were red. It was as if a piece of flesh had been gouged out of his chest. The pain was unbearable. Yuxiang woke up with a scream. He looked around and saw that there were no broken limbs or billowing smoke. He was clearly in the old ancestor's bedroom. The old ancestor was old and a light sleeper. She only slept for a quarter of an hour at noon and felt that it was enough. She was sitting in the outer room looking through the accounts. When she heard Yuxiang scream, the prayer beads in her hand fell to the ground. If her ears were still working, Yuxiang seemed to be screaming, "Brother, get out of the way." The old ancestor threw the account book aside and walked in with her walking stick. Did you have a nightmare? Did you dream about your brother? Ever since the landslide, she paid special attention to Yuxiang's dreams. No, I didn't dream about anything. Yuxiang was worried about herself, but she didn't want the old ancestor to suffer with her. Don't lie to me. I heard it all. Did you dream that Yan had an accident? The old ancestor swore to get to the bottom of this. No, I just dreamed about the battlefield. There was blood everywhere and vultures were crying in the sky. It was very scary. That's why I screamed. Old ancestor, it was just a dream. Yuxiang forced a smile. Only she knew that her heart was about to jump out of her throat. Other people's dreams are just dreams, but not yours. The old ancestor sat on the edge of the bed and stared straight at her. This child was very intelligent. The first time she recited the scriptures, she felt as if there were gods and Buddhas chanting in her ears. It made her forget whether she was in heaven or in the mortal world. Yu Xiang didn't want to recall the scene in her dream. She couldn't even sense whether Yu Pinyin was alive or dead. In order to avoid the old ancestor's questioning, she covered her chest and screamed in pain. "What's going on? You were fine just now. Someone, quickly find a doctor. Hurry up." The old ancestor saw that Yu Xiang's face was deathly pale and dripping with cold sweat. She was in so much pain that she wanted to roll on the bed. The old ancestor immediately threw the dream to the back of her mind and ran out to urge Yu Xiang. The doctor came and carefully checked Yu Xiang's pulse. After repeated checking several times, he still couldn't find the cause of Yu Xiang's illness. He could only prescribe some calming medicine. When Yu Xiang pressed her hand to her chest, she realized that the pain wasn't an illusion from her dream. It was real. She knew very well that she wasn't sick or injured. Something must have happened to Yu Pinyin. Yu Xiang endured the pain and knelt in front of the Buddha to pray. She prayed non-stop. She devoutly recited all the scriptures that she could remember in her mind. She knelt for an entire day and night. At first, the old ancestor accompanied her, but after 6 to 8 hours, she couldn't take it anymore. Under Mama Ma's repeated persuasion, she returned to her room to rest. This child is so sincere. They're clearly not biological siblings, but they're closer than biological siblings. The old ancestor shook her head and sighed. Look at what you're saying. In Mrs. Hart, Master Ho is her biological brother. After all, they grew up together. Mama Ma gently massaged the old ancestor's legs. What has she been doing these past few days? The old ancestor pointed to the east wing. She sent people to buy a lot of satin and embroidery thread. She said that she wanted to embroider a portrait for the deceased Master Ho. She also wanted to tailor clothes for the young miss who was living outside. Mama Ma unconsciously lowered her voice. The old ancestor was silent for a long time before she exhaled. Her voice didn't contain a trace of human emotion. Yandere is fighting on the battlefield, but she's embroidering a portrait. She thinks that Yandere's life is too hard and can't die, right? She suddenly felt that the last sentence was rather inauspicious. She hurriedly chanted, Amitabha. Then she sighed and said, I've seen through it all. Blood ties, flesh and blood. Without a heart, she's worse than a stranger. Whether a person is close or distant, close or close, it all depends on the word fate. She and Yandere are not fated to be mother and son. On the other hand, Xiang has a deep fate with our Marquis's manor. It's all heaven's will. The old ancestor finally let go of Yu Xiang's past. She sat on the couch and stared blankly for a while. Then she impatiently waved her hand. Go. Burn all of her embroidery thread, and embroidery cloth. Tell her that before Yandere returns home, she's not allowed to cause any more trouble. Otherwise, she can take the divorce papers and go home. Mama Ma agreed in a low voice. She sighed at the madam's actions. If it weren't for the fact that she was worried about little Master Ho's reputation, she would have been divorced hundreds of times for being so ignorant. The author has something to say. Thank you to my cute little creatures, and thank you to all the friends who supported the original novel. Moi. Chapter 26. Ever since Yu Xiang woke up from his dream and knelt in the temple for a day and a night, the matriarch felt that life had become difficult. Every day, as soon as she opened her eyes, she would ask if there were any war reports from the northwest and if Master Ho had sent any news. The servants could only shake their heads. The matriarch turned to ask Yu Xiang about his dream, but Yu Xiang only covered his chest and cried out in pain. The matriarch couldn't tell whether his miserable appearance was real or not, so she had to give up and hurriedly find a doctor. More than half a month had passed in this manner. The matriarch's attention was finally attracted by another matter. The divine monk of Zhenghua Temple, the Kohai monk, had returned from his travels and set up a bamboo pot for those who were fated to see his fortune. After 3 to 5 days, he would go to Tianzhu to worship Buddha. Speaking of the Kohai monk, he was the most legendary figure in the Han dynasty. 70 years ago, the founding emperor was just a small marquis. He was lucky enough to draw the Kohai monk's lot king at Guangji Temple and had a chat with him. Before leaving, the Kohai monk gave him a wild scrawl with the words, "The dragon swims in the 9 heavens, the 5 continents are the same." The poem wasn't a good one, but the words were good. The emperor had it framed and hung in his room. It wasn't until the day he ascended the throne that he understood that this was the fate that the Kohai monk refused to tell him, the fate of Jiao Wu, the supreme ruler of the world. No one could have imagined that a small marquis would become the master of this vast land after a few years. Since then, Guangji Temple was renamed Zhenghua Temple by the emperor's imperial edict. The Kohai monk's lot king became a divine object that everyone in the Han dynasty sought after like a flock of ducks. Now, 70 years had passed, but the Kohai monk still looked the same as before, as if time had forgotten him. Because of this, his status became more and more extraordinary, and people yearned for him more and more. When the matriarch heard the news, she immediately ordered people to prepare a carriage to go to Zhenghua Temple. Ask the maidservant to give Xiang more clothes to wear so that she won't catch a cold on the way. She was worried. Mama Ma stood in the corridor and looked at the sky. She hesitated and said, "The old lady, it's raining heavily outside. I'm afraid the road is muddy. Let's go another day. We have to go on the first day of the opening of the scripture altar. Otherwise, when the number of people increases in the future, we won't even be able to squeeze in. Today, the crown princess will definitely be there, so we can make use of her." The old lady waved her hand. Mama Ma had no choice but to brave the heavy rain and run to the west wing to ask Yu Xiang to quickly prepare. It was also strange. The torrential rain was so powerful that it seemed as if it wanted to pour all the water from the 9th heaven. Yu Xiang had just finished dressing and looked outside when the rain stopped. A beam of golden sunlight pierced through the clouds and fell on her head. It made her originally white little face look like jade that had been soaked in a 1,000-year cold pond, pure and holy. The floating dust around her added a bit of spirit to her. Mama Ma stood in place and stared at her for a long time. Only when Yu Xiang raised her eyebrows at her strangely did she come to her senses and hurriedly pushed her out. When the grandmother and granddaughter arrived at Zhenghua Temple, they saw that the crown princess carriage was parked outside the door. Many imperial bodyguards were patrolling around with swords and halberds. When they saw unrelated people, they came forward to chase them away. Yu Pinyin was currently fighting in the northwest. If he came back victorious, he might inherit the old Marquis Yonla's mantle and become the general of agile cavalry, in charge of millions of soldiers and horses. He was the crown prince's most trusted subordinate and also the crown prince's most relied on support. In terms of personal relationship, he was not inferior to his own brother. Because of this relationship, the crown princess sent someone to greet the old madam as soon as she passed the message. The eyes of the noblewomen who were unable to enter the temple turned red with jealousy. The group of people greeted each other and chatted with each other after sitting down. Did the crown princess draw the lot king? The old madam asked curiously. Not yet. Of the 100 people who came with me today, not a single one drew the lot king. It can be seen that they are not fated with Master Kohai. They were praying and listening to scriptures in the main hall and left after 2 hours. The crown princess shook her head and smiled bitterly. The Kohai monk was the great Han dynasty's divine monk. Anyone who had the word divine in their name would have an unrestrained and uninhibited character in their bones. Their actions and words were all based on their personal preferences. The Kohai monk's physiognomy was amazingly accurate. He could see through life, death, and the future. However, he could not predict just anyone. He also paid attention to fate. He had the craftsman make a huge rotating lot pot. It was divided into 2 layers, with a partition in the middle. It could hold a total of 50,000 lots. The person who asked for the lot would rotate the lot pot and remove the partition in the middle. When all the lots fell to the bottom, they would bend down and pick up a random lot. If the lot king was drawn, it meant that the person who asked for the lot was fated with the Kohai monk. He would then talk to you. No matter what you asked, you would be able to get the answer from him. 50,000 lots, 1 chance. In the 70 years since the founding of the Great Han Dynasty, only the Emperor Xingzhu was lucky enough to draw the lot king. Because of this, every time the Kohai monk returned to the capital to meditate, wave after wave of people came to the Zhenghua temple to ask for the lot. They wished they could flatten the mountain top. The first few days were naturally reserved by the imperial family. The next few days were the nobles' turn. If the commoners wanted to enter, they would have to wait until all the officials and nobles in the capital had gone. The old madam and the crown princess sighed for a while. When they saw that the crown princess and the empress families had all drawn lots, they brought Yuxiang over. "I'll be in charge of rotating the lot pot. You'll be in charge of picking up the lots. When the lot pot starts raining down, you must not hesitate. Just pick the ones that you find pleasing to the eye. Whether you meet or not is all about fate. Don't ask for too much," the old madam gently warned. Yuxiang nodded in agreement. The 2 of them put their palms together and secretly prayed for Bodhisattva's protection. The crown princess and a group of noblewomen stood to the side, waiting. The lot pot was very heavy. The old madam only spun it twice before she was covered in sweat. She had to spin it 3 more times before she could remove the partition. A series of clattering noises were heard as the bamboo skewers fell down like raindrops. A young novice monk stretched out his hand and said, "Benefactor, please choose one within 2 breaths. If you choose after 2 breaths, you will have no fate with the great master." Choosing one within 2 breaths, there really wasn't any possibility of cheating. Yuxiang didn't wait for all the bamboo sticks to fall. He reached out and grabbed one from the air, giving it to the young novice monk. At first, the young novice monk was all smiles. When he saw the 2 words "Lot King" carved in Sanskrit on the bamboo stick, his face immediately changed. He ran towards the rear courtyard in a panic, shouting as he ran, "Master, someone has drawn the Lot King." As soon as these words came out, the hall instantly boiled over. The old madam came with the intention of giving it a try. She never thought that she would draw it. This time she was dumbfounded. She looked at the lot pot for a while, then looked at Yuxiang. She felt that her head was heavy and her feet were light, as if she was in a dream. The crown princess stared at Yuxiang, thinking to herself, "Marquis Yongla, this legitimate daughter, is really a spiritual person. Marquis Yongla's family is really blessed. No wonder the crown prince was able to escape death twice." Because this lot only determined whether or not he could meet the Kohai monk, it wasn't a lot of fate. The person who drew it could only be said to be lucky and have a predestined relationship with the Kohai. Other malicious rumors wouldn't spread. The old madam exchanged greetings with the noble ladies who had come to congratulate her and pat Yuxiang on the back of the hall. Then she was led by a monk into the rear hall. Several young novice monks gathered around and put the fallen bamboo sticks back on the upper floor. The Kohai monk's meditation room was very simple. It was only a small room of 20 square meters. There was nothing inside except for a prayer mat and a table. There was a small courtyard outside, with a Bodhi tree planted and a lotus pond dug out. It was simple but grand. The old madam held her breath and walked slowly. When she reached the door of the meditation room, she hesitated and said, "Xianger, can you wait outside for a moment?" Ancestor has something to say to the great master alone. Yu Xiang was an outsider. She couldn't help but feel anxious to meet a godly person like the Kuhai. She immediately nodded and agreed. Her heart had already been dug out and her body was in the hands of her mother. In order to hide the truth, she must have been hurriedly cremated. Even if she could go back, would she still be Yu Xiang? Would she still be able to see that person? She fell into a daze for a moment. It had been 70 years since the establishment of the great Han dynasty. The Kuhai of 70 years ago was still the same today. His eyebrows and beard were white, and there were no more or less wrinkles on his face. His eyes were as deep as the sea. When he saw the old madam, he chanted a Buddhist prayer and extended his hand to invite her to sit. "May I ask what kind of advice the benefactor has for me?" "Great master, please help me look at these two characters." The old madam took out 2 pieces of paper from her sleeve and spread them out on the table. The Kuhai monk nodded and looked at them carefully for a moment. He pointed to one of them and said, "Yin Chi, Lone Wan and Widow, overlapping stars, Father Jinx's mother, Husband Jinx's son, 6 relatives and livestock, none of them are lucky enough to escape. Even if there is a noble person, there is no help." The old madam had already prepared herself mentally, but after hearing these words, she couldn't help but turn pale. The Kuhai monk didn't care about her. He pointed to the other piece of paper and continued, "Parents are not fated to meet each other, earthly branches are unable to meet each other, female martial artist, male martial artist, male martial artist, Nine sword, will not end well. Won't end well." The old madam's body swayed as if she was about to faint. Mama Ma hurried forward to support her. The Kuhai monk glanced at her and said, "These two people's fates are conflicting. If they are husband and wife, the family will not have peace. If they are brothers and sisters, they will fight each other and can't coexist." The old madam was getting dizzy. Her voice trembled as she said, "Won't end well. Is there no way to change fate? How can it not end well?" As for the conflicting fates, she didn't have the time to think about it. The Kuhai monk closed his eyes and calculated. Suddenly, he exclaimed in surprise. The old madam rushed over and asked, "Great master, do you have a way?" It was originally an unresolvable fate, but suddenly a tiny noble person appeared. Good. The Kuhai monk put his palms together and sighed. This person just passed a life and death tribulation a few days ago. Presumably, this tiny noble person is already by his side. Benefactor, you can rest assured. Who is this tiny noble person? The old madam was exhausted, but she still wanted to ask for help. He's so far away, but so close. After saying that, he stood up and walked toward Yu Xiang under the Bodhi tree. His eyes were full of splendor. He was clearly a child, but he had a soul from another world. His left eye was filled with hostility, and his right eye was indifferent. Between his eyebrows, there was a vigorous golden Buddha's light. His head was covered by a canopy, and his fate was unparalleled. He had never seen such a person with such a deep Buddha's fate. Amitabha. The Kuhai monk put his palms together and was about to speak. Yu Xiang interrupted, "If you want to ask me where I come from and where I go, I will tell you where I come from and where I go. If you want to ask me what I think, I will tell you that when I have no delusions, my heart is a Buddhist kingdom. When I have delusions, my heart is a hell. I have delusions, so I would rather be in hell. So you don't need to pity me, and you don't need to release me. Since I have made up my mind to hold on to the only thing I can, I will no longer hope for the uncertain future, or should I say the past." She spat out a mouthful of turbid air at the lotus leaves in the pond. Her mood was unprecedentedly bright. The Kuhai monk finally smiled for the first time that day. He said slowly, "Benefactor has thought it through. There is no need for this old monk to say more." Yu Xiang nodded and asked, "Is my brother safe?" One who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune later. The Kohai monk looked at the old lady and said with a smile, his fortune is unparalleled, and his fate with Buddha is deep. He will bring prosperity to the husband, the family, and the 6 animals. This child can be a treasure to guard the house. Benefactor, you don't need to look elsewhere for this Tai noble person. Amitba, good indeed, good indeed. The old lady stared blankly for a moment before revealing an expression of ecstasy. She repeatedly thanked the Kohai. Kohai smiled faintly and shook his head. He also said that if he found his junior brother Ku Hui, he would definitely order him to visit the old lady and treat her injured leg. A treasure to guard the house. Me. The corner of Yu Xiang's mouth twitched when she heard this. However, she also understood that with the old monk's words, her days in Marquis Yongla would be even better. However, no matter how good her life was, she was only a foil to the female lead. She was destined to be a phoenix dancing in the 9 heavens. Chapter 27. The noblewomen gathered outside the hall, craning their necks from time to time. Seeing that the old lady finally came out, they hurriedly surrounded her. The crown princess invited the old lady to sit beside her and ordered people to prepare pastries for Yu Xiang. Then she slowly said, "Did old madam you get a satisfactory answer from Master Kohai?" As for what the old lady asked, she didn't have the heart to pry. After all, she was born in a big family, and her upbringing was there. The old lady smiled and said, "Satisfied, very satisfied. At this time, I didn't dare to ask anything. I only asked about Yandere's safety, saying that he narrowly escaped death and will definitely return safely." Yu Pinyan's military exploits meant that the crown prince's support was increased. The crown princess also smiled happily when she heard this. The noblewomen knew that the old lady valued her grandson more than anything else. Her grandson fought on the battlefield and narrowly escaped death. It would be surprising if she didn't ask about this. Therefore, they asked about his well-being again. Yu Xiang endured for a moment, but finally couldn't sit still. She pulled the old lady's clothes and said softly, "Old ancestor, I want to go to the Hall of Great Strength to pray for my brother. Can I go first?" "Okay, go ahead. Old ancestor will come later." The old lady lovingly patted her head. After Yu Xiang left, the old lady and the crown princess chatted for a while. The two moved to the Hall of Great Strength and saw the little child kneeling on the futon. Every time she recited a sutra, she kowtowed devoutly. In less than half an hour, her forehead was already red and swollen. She looked at the Buddha in the hall with eyes full of pleading, praying that he would bring her brother back safely. The old lady saw that tears came out of her eyes. She quickly lowered her head and wiped it with a handkerchief. The crown princess sighed and said, "Old madam you didn't lose out by raising this granddaughter. Which family's siblings can be as affectionate as your family? It's really rare." The old lady pursed her lips and smiled. Her tone was a bit proud. "The crown princess is right. My Xiang-er is the best. She is filial, sensible, polite, and intelligent." The crown princess chuckled and left the hall to the granddaughter and granddaughter who were seeking peace. After reciting scriptures in the hall for a whole day and donating 500 kilograms of incense oil, the pair of grandfather and grandson went down the mountain under the setting sun. Old Madame Fu and Mama Ma sat in the front carriage, while Yu Xiang and her personal maidservant sat in the back. After being basked in the sun for half a day, the mud on the road had already dried up. It was much smoother when they left than when they came, but the old lady's mood was even more uneasy. The Kohai monk's comments kept circling in her mind, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get rid of them. She tore apart those words one by one, crushed them, and then pieced them back together again. The feeling of discomfort that she deliberately ignored was infinitely magnified. Her granddaughter was indeed a jinx. Mama Ma was also worried about her. After hesitating for a while, she softly said, "The old lady, Master Kohai said that Miss and Master Ho's fates clash. If they are siblings, they will fight and cannot coexist. What do you think we should do? Should they still find this person? What if she jinxes Master Ho? They will fight and cannot coexist. In other words, the granddaughter and grandson will fight for their fates. But if the granddaughter's life is tough, will the grandson also have a bad ending?" Old Madame Fu was frightened by her own conjecture. Her lips trembled and she couldn't speak for a long time. But she wasn't as indifferent and heartless as the Lin clan. She couldn't let her granddaughter wander outside to fend for herself. She waited until she calmed down before she tiredly said, "Naturally, we still have to find her. When we find her, we have to keep them far away from each other. Then, we have to quickly arrange a marriage and get married far away. With Mrs. Fate, I'm afraid it will be a bit." Mama Ma didn't dare to say what she wanted to say next. If they betrothed the jinx to another family, it wouldn't be a marriage, it would be a feud. Old Madame Fu muttered, "Naturally, we can't harm others. We have to find someone with a similarly tough fate. It doesn't matter if they are a second wife or if they are from a poor family. It will be enough as long as both rooms are safe. At most, Marquis Yongla will have to give her more dowry to ensure that she will be wealthy for the rest of her life." She let out a long sigh. The old lady is right. If two fates are put together, you can't restrain me and I can't restrain you, so there will be no problems. Mama Ma saw that old Madame Fu was in a bad mood and quickly racked her brains to make fun of her. "But you don't have to worry. Don't we still have a treasure to guard the house? With Miss Xiang there, nothing will happen to the Marquis household. Miss Xiang grows whatever she plants. If she wants to go on a long trip, the heavens will open their eyes. She is the 1 in a million lottery winners. She is very lucky." Old Madame Fu's mood improved a lot when she heard this. She nodded and smiled. Then family Shen really suffered a loss. Such a good lucky star was actually carried into my Marquis Yongla. It's really, she quickly stopped when she said this. Her mood was a bit strange. Yes, family Shen's Fuwa was carried away by Marquis Yongla. Marquis Yongla's jinx was carried away by family Shen. Then what was the family Shen situation now? It couldn't be that they were suffering one disaster after another, right? She couldn't think about it anymore. The more she thought about it, the guiltier she felt. Old Madame Fu covered her mouth and coughed. Mama Ma also thought about this. Her expression was a bit embarrassed. She thought to herself, Madame said that she was harmed by family Shen, but she didn't know that family Shen was the real victim. Bodhisattva is still on our Marquis Yongla's side. Amitba, good indeed. After Yu Xiang accepted Yupinion from the bottom of her heart, she no longer had the mentality of wasting her time in Marquis Yongla. Whenever old Madame Fu had a headache or fever, she would accompany her. The two of them would recite scriptures together and do needlework together. Their relationship grew stronger day by day. Half a year later, Yu Xiang was finally persuaded by old Madame Fu and began to take over the Marquis household. In her previous life, she had also run a few small companies. It wasn't to make money, but purely to pass the time. However, she still managed them well. Managing a Marquis household of 200 to 300 people was like playing around. At first, old Madame Fu was worried that she would be fooled or controlled by a group of nannies, so she often watched from the side. Seeing that not only was she not stumped, but she also trained the nannies to be obedient, old Madame Fu was very satisfied. Furthermore, Yu Xiang knew that she was an impostor. Sooner or later, she would have to leave the Marquis household. Therefore, she made the account books very meticulously. Even the copper coins and silver taels were spent were clearly recorded. It was clear, and it was clear at a glance. She thought that when she returned the funds in the future, she wouldn't let others use this as a pretext to make things difficult for her. Old Madame Fu didn't know what Yu Xiang was thinking, but she saw Yu Xiang's talent in her eyes. In her heart, she loved her even more. At once, she pushed all the trivial matters on hand to Yu Xiang. She planted flowers and raised fish, leisurely passing her days. Her body, which had been damaged by exhaustion, gradually recovered. A year and a half later, Yu Pinyin quelled Prince Yu's rebellion and returned to the capital victoriously. He was promoted to 4th grade General Guang Wei, with 180,000 soldiers under his command. It wasn't a lot, but it wasn't a small number either. Moreover, he was only 17 years old. He was brave and resourceful, and his future was limitless. On the day the army entered the capital, old Madame Fu was worried about Yu Xiang's inconvenience and didn't go to the city gate to welcome him. The grandfather and grandson pair were still hiding behind the wall, listening to the uniform sound of the horses' hooves. This time, their eyes were full of smiles. Yu Pinyin hurriedly rushed home as soon as he left court. As soon as he stepped through the threshold, he saw his sister sitting in a wheelchair, smiling brightly at him. Old Madame Fu stood behind her. She was also smiling, but for some reason, she began to cry. Afraid that she would spoil the mood, she quickly lowered her head and wiped away her tears. The youth had grown taller and stronger. He wore a set of crimson battle robes. His face was still as handsome as before, but it was more mature and resolute. In the depths of his eyes, there was still a bloodthirsty aura that couldn't be extinguished. His fierce reputation on the battlefield had long spread to the capital. Seeing him today, she finally understood why the rebel army called him the jade-faced king of hell. If he stood there expressionlessly, the sharpness of his temperament, tempered by blood and the flames of war, would be like a knife. He would cut the people around him until they were covered in cuts and bruises, not daring to approach. Old Madame Fu stood in place, a look of understanding in her eyes. Unknowingly, her grandson had become a more courageous general than his grandfather. However, Yu Xiang didn't seem to notice the change in her brother. She spread out her arms and repeatedly called out, "Big brother." If her legs were intact, she would be like a swallow flying into the forest, throwing herself into her brother's arms without a care. Yu Pinyin chuckled softly. His voice was more vigorous and sexy than before. The gentleness in his eyes dispersed all the blood in his body. He bent down and took his younger sister, who was becoming more and more beautiful and cute, into his arms. He weighed her in his arms and then said with dissatisfaction, "You've gotten thinner." 11 years old could be considered a big girl in the great Han dynasty. She shouldn't stay in her brother's arms. However, Yu Xiang didn't have any self-awareness. She wrapped her arms around her brother's neck and complained, "If you don't return home safely, old Madame Fu and I won't be able to eat well or sleep well. How can I not get thinner? You don't know that every month, a letter is sent back. Old Madame Fu and I stand at the door every day to check. When we see the soldiers bringing the war reports enter the capital, we quickly send people out to inquire. Look at our necks, they're 3 inches longer than before." She poured out all the grievances she had suffered over the past few days. As Yu Xiang spoke, she began to choke with sobs. She buried her head and smeared her tears on Yu Pinyin to vent the hatred in her heart. The matriarch didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she poked her forehead. However, Yu Pinyin couldn't laugh at all. Large drops of tears flowed down his clothes and fell on his bronze skin, burning him to the point that he couldn't stop trembling. It wasn't until this moment that the clamorous sounds of the war drums, the roars of the soldiers fighting, the rumbling of the artillery, and the cries of the souls of the dead finally faded from his mind. They were replaced by the weak sobs that contained countless grievances and longing. It was only then that he transformed from a heartless and emotionless war blade into a person of flesh and blood. Don't cry. He forcefully rubbed the top of the little girl's head and said hoarsely, older brother is back. Older brother is back alive. Yuxiang slowly stopped crying. She used her sleeve to carelessly wipe away the tears and snot on her face. She pressed her face tightly against her older brother's face and laughed lightly. As she laughed, she couldn't help but rub the tip of her nose against her older brother's, breathing the same air as him. Crazy girl, crying and laughing at the same time is improper. Hurry and let your older brother into the room to rest. The matriarch reprimanded her, but her eyes were full of joy. She went forward to pinch her grandson's strong shoulders and sighed, you've grown stronger. You're even taller than your grandfather. Yu Pinyin also stared at her temples in amazement and said with a smile, old Madame Fu, you look younger than before. You don't know, do you? Our Xiang is capable now. She will help me manage the household. She has the final say in everything in this Fu. I don't have to worry at all. Every day, I only eat vegetarian food, pray to Buddha, and grow flowers and plants. It's a relaxing life. How can I not be younger? You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.